with a second part, a part in which I myself actually talk. Amazing to me that, honestly, what started off with something that I needed to buy me time so I could pull my head out of my ass has turned into a number of people who are certainly, you know, uh, using the platform, and that's for the best. I, it can sometimes, how shall we say it? By the time I feel like I've gotten everybody in and given everybody their due, then there's not that much time left for analysis. So we're taking care of that now. Certainly this morning it's going to be just myself with analysis, but I need feedback. I need people to tell me if they hear me. So let's get started with that. Let me check into live streaming and make certain that this is streaming at all. And this is part 2. All right, and let's refresh this page here, see what we can come up with. Okay, we are live, and here we are. Let's go back to the new live stream, and then we turn that on. All right, and then I take, thank you for the upvote. We have one person who's placed an upvote already. Bless their hearts. Okay, and you see 2 of them now, so you know that's not just me. All right, so let's take a look at get this. Let's take a look at 3 now. Excellent. God bless you. So I hear myself. Good. And what we're going to do is test out the link, make certain the link works, and then we're going to take it from there. So if people are giving up votes, I figure they can hear me as well as I can. Okay. It's okay. Good. Okay. So everybody bear with me while I go through the process of just shoving these links everywhere. And then, as a matter of fact, I should put these links up first, the new hyperlinks. And they get these up to par. Make certain that they're showing off so people in the Facebook timeline can access myself. Again, I recommend everybody to basically, if they don't have a Facebook timeline, set up a false account. If you don't want to, bother yourself with the crap on Facebook, then take your time to set up a phony account so you can just keep track of my promotional banners, which add a lot of context to what you're listening to on any of my transmissions. So let's see how long I last, and I'm going to try and make this, not necessarily brief as possible. It'll probably take, some hours. But at least there are hours in which I will be doing what I should be doing, which is actually monologuing. And I really have to make that kind of like the get back into focusing on that to degree. I always enjoy having the other people here, and believe me, they are family, and I do want them talking. And most of the time, I truly need them. I need them talking so that I can come out of a hangover that I'm usually in when I start these programs. And otherwise, however, sometimes, it's amazing how little time I have left when everybody else is done to get any analysis to you. And ultimately, that's really what this program is about, is to bring you analysis. I did promise some analysis on Australia as a situation, and I'll certainly try and get into that. Oh my God. So trying to get my breath here, and let's see if I can get these links in some of these other areas. Also checking in with George Knight, who knows, if he wants to come on for a few minutes, or Peter Moon. God knows he was 6 hours ago, so he might wake up. But that would be, again, just to buy myself some time if I needed to kind of put myself into more of a rhythm of things. Just talking. All right, get myself back to the chats. Get myself here at George. And here we are. Okay. Scroll down here. All right. Checking in. All right. And oh my God. All right. Breathing. Now let's get the other links up. See what we can do here. Take this link. Put this inside of the promotional banner. And edit that post. Oh, shit. Okay. Wrong way to approach this. Okay. Move this down. Repost that so I don't have to deal with that. There we are, saving. Good. Get that large again. Then you're going to hear me putter for a bit, so be patient. On link at, here we are. There we go. Part 1. Earlier. Part 1 transmitted earlier. First part. Transmitted earlier. Transmitted earlier. At symbol. There we are. First part transmitted earlier at. Yes, here we are. Okay, good. All right. Funny how my voice just goes to shit the moment I get on. And, all right, done editing. Okay, and no matter how much I try to rehydrate myself, you know, life is hard. Well, guess I can handle it, I hope. If not, what the hell, I can always hang up. It's not like I owe anybody. Oh. I owe it to myself, but I don't owe it to anybody else. All right, now live and burning bandwidth, and we'll see how many people gather to hear me mumble and rumble. All right, good. Okay, this seems to be going well. All right, last one we'll do here. First part transmitted earlier. There we are. Good. Okay, get rid of this. And edit post. Last one to do this with. There we are. Okay. And okay. Now, just saw a trailer for another Battleship Yamato film, historical, called The Great War of Archimedes, in which the Japanese themselves are basically putting all of this effort, of course, into these incredibly complex machines that were just an enormous effort in trying to create a strategic impact on the world around them. So much more effort and machinery and in energy and time was invested into these monumental machines than was ever necessary. And the end of the war's outcome was, of course, decided by extremely elegant and comparatively inexpensive aero dreadnoughts, as opposed to the battleships that the Navy was concentrating on. At the same time, all of that money was spent because it had to, an appearance had to be made that Japan was conventional, that Japan was conventionally equipped, and if that had not been done, then the unconventional weapons would not have worked, because people would realize that they existed, because obviously something would have had to have been in Japan's arsenal. So the all of the money spent on something that was quote unquote as useless strategically, operationally, as the Yamato class battleships was ultimately money well spent, in the sense that it generated so much attention and just ate up all of the American and Western resources to pursue them. And that was their primary purpose. And just as the Americans will brag that they had all of these rubber tanks and wooden tanks and all of these decoys, there was no way intelligence could hide what the Japanese had. So when it came to what the Japanese were producing, and it was always under surveillance, then what you had was a situation that you had to produce something real, something that was functional, something that ultimately, even though it was not a functional machine in terms of modern warfare and where modern warfare was going, it certainly misled the Americans into a dead end that they've never been able to escape from. A dead end that failed them in World War II, and a dead end that's failed them ever since, which is aircraft carrier technology, which, as I've expressed before, even their own specialists were decrying as completely worthless investments. And this was, of course, seen by Hirohito in the beginning, and was exposed, of course, by the U-boats sinking the British aircraft carriers. The arc of operational supremacy for aircraft carriers is far, far shorter than anybody knows in the layman's world, or even in the professional world. Bear in mind that the majority of your professionals are nothing but hacks and shills who are employed in what are effectively permanent employment programs, or social welfare for specialists when it comes to your think tanks, your military, and, well, so much of everything else, honestly. But especially your think tanks and your military. And these are the last people on Earth who should be listened to. And honestly, they've run your world into the ground. And people are not going to find this out until the next war exposes all of their failings. So as for the next war, I hope people derive some amusement from the fact that I thought all this talk about UAPs was talk about UAVs. And I thought people were finally getting serious and talking about real-term warfare, and instead it's all just a bunch of shit, and everybody's just talking about UFOs all over again. Holy crap. So we'll, you know, if I, oh God, if I ever get on the Just Roge program, probably best I bring her on my program first. But, you know, if she's willing to come, and, you know, if she'll have me on hers, we'll see what happens in the near future. But she always seemed open before. And as well, should check in and say hello with Joe Boyer. Other than that, of course, hi to everybody in general out there. Hopefully we built some people up while we're killing time waiting for people to come on and regather. I'll do the solicitation. Mein Kampf, my struggle be thine own. Contribute to the struggle at paypal.me/Douglas Dietrich. Understand, of course, that I have a crown that's fallen out. I have to deal with UCSF. The costs are not simply the cleaning and the crown and everything involved with the insanity. It's actually the price of getting to UCSF and back in a cab. Now, fortunately, Salman Sheikh, this wonderful individual, sent myself a $70 check, and this provides me some money to take a cab there and back. And it really adds up to about 3 cab rides, because each cab ride costs $20, and it's $40 for a 2-way trip to UCSF and back in San Francisco, because we're such a congested city, and we're so small that the cab fares are outrageous. The clocks, once they start ticking on a San Francisco cab, are ticking at 3 times the rate they would be in any other city, because they're trying to clock up money. You know, the more I think about cabs, the more I hate them, of course, because my experience with them throughout life has been so profoundly negative. And I recommend, of course, never taking them. If you're in the city, take Uber, take Flywheel, if you can at all avoid the cabs. Of course, once you need to ride something, you'll grab anything. The problem is most of them will never stop. And whatever the hell they're doing, they're not looking for clientele. I can guarantee you that. You'll find that out if you're, on the corner of a major traffic artery trying to wave one down. You can be elsewhere in San Francisco. You may as well be on Mars. The only place you're going to catch cabs is on major traffic arteries. Of course, you could stand there all day waving your arms until they fall off, and nobody's going to stop for you. In any other case, however, it's infinitely worse. You'll be calling cabs and they'll never show up. It's hell on earth. So honestly, you're stuck with renting cars. Is the only way you're going to get around if you ever come to San Francisco. You're not going to be getting around by cabs. That's for damn sure. You're going to wind up using the municipal system, which of course is something that is just, I grew up using the municipal system and pretty much promised myself I would never use it again if I could possibly avoid it. So I've tried to avoid it at all costs. So all in all, it's all shit. But it's the cost. So I got to pay for cab rides to $20 to get to the dentist, $20 to get back. So it's $40 each trip. I'm going to spend 40 fucking bucks tomorrow to get to a goddamn COVID test. Nothing but a fucking COVID test so that I can go home, wait for that to test out. And then theoretically, if everything works out, then I'll be seen by my pre-doctoral dentist on Tuesday of next week. And so this is the insanity. That's another 40 bucks there. And of course, whatever the cost is for the cleaning from last time, which should be about, close to $100, more like 80 something, 80, maybe a little more than $80. But I looked that up and that seems to be the price. I don't know until I'm there, until, they charge me. They might charge something for getting the crown back on. They sure as fuck shouldn't, because it's their sloppy work that led to its falling off. I don't know how they're going to get this shit on. It's the same bitch who screwed it on in the first place that in such a manner that fell off. And I'm going to be trying to get her to do something about the tooth in front of it, where when I went to Western Dental, they butchered it. And of course, Pac One and Morales and I can go in to this ad nauseum concerning Western Dental, because he's also been in California, San Diego Marine Corps Recruit Depot, and had to deal with Western Dental and the chop shop that it is, and how they've, fucked up his teeth and my teeth for life. Of course, at least I've got teeth. Pac One was left with, they removed most of his dentures. I'd have to have him here to actually ask him what the fuck they did, but what they did to him was horrible. But my experience is, just as bad when you factor in all of my relations I was trying to get treated dentally. And oh my God, we're lucky we got things done at all with my dad. My mother's case was far more dramatically tragic concerning the dental work, just as bad as it was for everything else. In the case of myself, okay, this is where we're at. I need money for the dentist. And so this is a time when I was helped out by some wonderful people, as I've already mentioned. And I won't hesitate to thank them again. Stephen Myers and Louis Rogers, his first name, I don't know their gender, their first name, Luis Rogers. It strikes me this might be a female in Australia. I might be wrong. New South Wales, shout out to them. They're 17 hours ahead of us. So we're talking like whatever time it is now, it's probably mid-afternoon or early evening or something over there. For a while there, I used to try and provide the schedule for Australia, but Australia's time zones are simply insurmountable. For those of you who live in Australia as well as out, there are very few people on Earth, inside or outside of Australia, that can really accurately tell you about their time zones. Their time zones are fucked up like you would not believe, because they don't just go like lines like ours do or Russia's does, where you've just got lines that go up and down. Their time zones also have to go sideways because they're above the Arctic Circle, and they've got to tabulate the changes in, their southern regions differently than their northern regions. So you've got that factor, as well as the horizontal as well as vertical. It's just awful. So it was just impossible to keep up with him, especially with daylight saving time changes that happen twice a year. It's just monstrous. At any rate, so I will return now to the solicitation at hand, and basically provide some other pointers in terms of my desperation. We now be accepting contributions via PayPal Holdings Incorporated at DouglasDietrich.com. Remember, of course, that is the yellow button, and if you use PayPal, which Louis Rogers did, she used PayPal, but she neglected or perhaps found it repugnant to indicate myself as friends and family. Again, I must emphasize, if you're going to send me a contribution through PayPal, of course I'll accept it, even if a blood cut is taken out of it by that faggot Peter Thiel, who's the man who established PayPal. But why would you want to give money to that son of a bitch? The guy's got more money than he needs. Honestly, just indicate myself as friends and relations so that I can receive your complete contribution uncompromised by that kind of perfidious pilfering. So just fuck Peter Thiel, indicate myself as friends or relations. We're obviously friends, or you wouldn't be trying to sponsor me, and we're all an extended electronic family. So again, go to DouglasDietrich.com, press that yellow button, and use PayPal to provide your contribution and indicate myself friends and family so Peter Thiel doesn't step in and take his pound of flesh. And in all due acknowledgement unto our own personal hero, we asketh of everyone a moral and our fiscal support on behalf of our dearest English brother in battle, John Henry McMills Warrington, whom you can friend and follow via his Facebook timeline at facebook.com/john.war, and subscribe as well to his YouTube maggot channel at youtube.com/c/maggotaur, which be spelled MAGGOTAUR, he being the property manager thereof, who also serves as Team Thrax, Dietrich's Our Dragon's ultimate post-episodic producer, and our final productions archivist at DouglasDietrich.com. Go to his channel, his other channel, and review my shows by putting Douglas Dietrich in the search bar at odyssey.com/@maggoty, which is impossible for you to find unless you spell it out, ODYSEE.com/@symbol MAGGOT:*E. It sounds like Maggot Colony. You can't forget that. At Maggot Colony after the slash. It'll boost his credits if you're able to review my shows at all, because most people can't even access them because the user interface on Odyssey is totally fucking retarded. But it has no censorship, so it serves as a further backup for everything I produce. And if you are able to access my shows via the search bar and then ultimately able to get them to work for you so you can review them on his channel, it boosts his credits, which allows him to upload more shows, so he doesn't have to spend a bean. As for why he deserves all our sympathy, were it not for he, nigh all the videographic works of the internationally recognized renegade military historian would have been lost, so if financial aid no be prohibitive per budgetary constraints, electronically relay monetary assistance via PayPal, where you can donate to the Maggot Man, aka John Warrington, by clicking send on your PayPal account page and then entering his email address, john_war@hotmail.com, and you can PayPal him directly at paypal.me/maggotaur, spelled MAGGOTAUR. If anyone's ever been deserving of fiscal assistance aside myself, it would be he, because were it not for he, as I said, taking his own initiative and downloading into his personal hard drives the majority of what I produced on YouTube and published thereupon, I would have nothing. He basically helped me by doing what he did, acting as the bridge between the Akashic Records and the cyber matrix, or the info data matrix of our material world. He essentially helped me recreate my legacy when it was completely scrubbed from the internet no less than thrice. That's 3 times. And therefore, in a very real sense, is my creator. And now you, too, can do your part to help in the fight against total annihilation, whether of my legacy online or all life from the surface of the earth, which be the ultimate objective of the cult of the kings of Edom and their Herodian insurgency. Spread the word about Douglas Dietrich, the one man who has always stood against them and warned the world of their presence, their reality. Spread the word about Douglas Dietrich, that he, the biological son of Adolphus Jacob Hitler, which you can find out more about at douglasdietrich.com/2019/05/08/ Douglas Dietrich, son of Adolf Hitler, fighting against white supremacist neo-Nazis. Confer while there a footnote on mine biosire, which is on the homepage of showsdd.com and explains the etymology, the meaning of my biological father's name, the name what made the man. And let it be known that the scion of Adolf Hitler, spread the word far and wide to all and sundry, that scion of Adolf Hitler, Douglas Dietrich, be alive and well and resident in the city and county of San Francisco. And if at all possible, encourage others to electronically relay their contributions at paypal.me/Douglas Dietrich, where they too can indicate myself as friends and family so that I receive the entirety of their contribution without compromise, because people are forever asking, Renegatus Humanis Arma Amaza Erudicio, the renegade human weapon of mass instruction, what they can do to fight the pedopathophilocracy, such being our present Slavo-Western government, by patriarchy of pathological pedophiles. You can all help spread awareness by supporting myself. And we have that new contribution page on douglasdietrich.com, where you can make a donation online using either thy credit or debit card, any credit or debit card other than PayPal, by pressing the red button. Simply go as to douglasdietrich.com and click the red donate button to use any other card in the world, credit or debit, to render your contribution without any concern for some fucking middleman. And this will eliminate the need, should you find it distasteful, to indicate myself friends and family. So that is another solution to your potential for support, and take advantage of it. And thereafter, you will want to use the yellow button anyway to bring yourself to the homepage of showsdd.com, because all sponsors will be granted exclusive electronic access to both my videographic and audio recorded archives through to this year, from the 2011th year in our Lord, the very year mine own late and sated matriarch, the Grand Madame Diana Lin Tsuchin Takabayashi Hideko Dietrich, was murdered, assassinated in immediately aftermath Sanju Ichi Sensemi, the 3/11 terror attack against the Fukushima Daiichi, or Big One cluster of nuclear power plant facilities on site, the 7,000 isles of the greater Japanese Empire, when 'twas deemed by much Native American cosmological reckoning that the first rays of the dawning of the Sixth World broke upon us, and magics could again be worked conjointly with Mother Earth to redeem the folk upon her. They're not on YouTube anymore, where on the intraglobal crises analyst Douglas Dwayne Dietrich long agone established his high-profile visibility platform per rationale of personal security by way of public promotion. Only on contribution will thy membership be processed within 48 through 72 hours, between 2 to 3 days, for full access to all mine archives, meaning all those videos that John Warrington saved, aside those on the Maggot Douglas Dietrich channel, or those on odyssey.com/@maggot:"E", and make certain that you reward yourself after rendering a contribution by pressing that yellow button, which takes you to the homepage of showsdd.com, where you can register to the archives and thereafter access them forevermore at your leisure, 24 hours a day, by simply logging in. And the YouTube channel, named Taboo Bros 2, TABOO space BROS space Roman numeral 2, whereon you can subscribe unto, as managed by mixed martial arts maestro Daniel Arola, whom you can visit at facebook.com/Daniel.Arola.3 of Damage, D-A-M-A-G, Daniel Arola Martial Arts Group Incorporated, Cali Combatives. Aside from that, optionally mail either checks or money orders, never cash, to the personal residential address of the Mr. Douglas Dietrich, which itself be listed on douglasdietrich.com/donate-2, the most important thing being that people regularly donate what they can within their means. Foremost among Axis Daddy D's donors, aside his mistress and manageress, Selina Khan be our most beloved Greater British brother in battle, the Team Thrax, Dietrich's or Dragon's heavyweight lifting keeper of the spirits, and YouTube Bizarre HD channel managing mixologist George Edward Knight, whom you can friend and follow at facebook.com/george.e.knight.7, and subscribe to his Bizarre HD channel at youtube.com/user/bizarrehd, which itself be spelled Bizarehd, he being mine own personal hero who has substantially delivered towards my salvation from the streets, and whose self-produced videos entitled How the United States Won World War I and Why We Are Still Legally at War with the Third Reich both be factually substantiated per mine own expositions. As well, his other production, which is now published, The Thousand-Year Reich in Exile, as subtitled The Third Reich's Flugelrad and Hanabu Technology, will provide you a true ufological history. If you watch that, hell, you don't need to, hear half the people that would appear on Just Roach's fucking time we talk about UAPs or unexplained aerial phenomenon. Holy shit. Or is it astrological or astronomical? I think it's aerological. Yeah, they should say aerospatial, unexplained aerospatial phenomena. Maybe that's what that stands for. Either way, it is just a new way for the government to distract you from the fact that they lost the fucking Second World War, and they never want you to find that out. Okay, and of course, the last Dietrich, son of Dietrich's or son of a dragon's, Anglo-corrupted as Dracula's expositions via YouTube would not be possible sans generous benefactions from my listeners on a monthly basis. The Amerasian agent of the Peacock Angel, Tavush Maliek, be the only person on the surface of this world with the insider knowledge and experience necessary to lead thy resistance against the Russo-sub-satanic occupation and anti-godly insurgency. It bearing no end of emphasis that Judy, Anglo-corrupted as Jedi, literally Master D, or the Master of Enlightenment myself, is not paid to articulate mine expositions and have never once been remunerated for my services rendered unto thyself and all thy holdest dear, at incomparable sacrifices to myself, most tragically of all mine loved ones, in my most singular and quite unenviable role as the ultimate public informant at personal risk, still at large. Your taxation cannot support me, as I be denied access to the United States Department of Veterans Affairs, benefits and or services due dishonorable discharge. So again, go to paypal.me/Douglas Dietrich and enter mine remunerative compensation. The very survival of the human species be at stake, and I am not exaggerating. Do not wait. Donate now. It be appreciated beyond my ability to express in any language. As well, forget not to subscribe to the Douglas Dietrich YouTube channel at youtube.com/C/Douglas Dietrich. And click on that notification bell in order to receive notifications that live streams has started. Even if ye be subscribed, you will only receive notifications if you select all in notifications. To reemphasize, subscribe to the Douglas Dietrich YouTube channel at youtube.com/C/Douglas Dietrich. Tune in at 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. That would be 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Wednesdays and Sundays, and click that notification bell in order to receive notifications that live streams has started. Finally, above and beyond all else, subscribe and support at douglasdietrich.com. And most importantly of all, donate at paypal.me/Douglas Dietrich, indicating myself as friends and family, so your contribution is not compromised by Peter Thiel taking his blood cut. Sponsors will be granted exclusive access to the online archives by punching in themselves onto the yellow button and accessing the archives, registering thereon, and thereafter you will be able to access them at your leisure, including all the video and MP3 recordings of Douglas Dietrich from 2011 through to the present. Okay, a little check into everyone around us. Let's take a look at what we've got in terms of notifications. Oh God, somebody's commenting here. Okay, that's nice. All right, everybody is leaving these little faces with hearts for eyes. That's cute, you know, and yeah, appreciate it. Okay, another one there. And oh God, what do you do with these? Okay, nice to see that people are responding so lustfully. Moving back into the space where, you know, I could talk about this. Let's see how many people we've got listening, and let's see if we can bring in more. Everybody notify others that I'm on, and let's see if we can maintain something. Now, this is interesting because we have absolutely... Marky Milk says, BART. Yes. Oh, he's talking about transportation in San Francisco. Bay Area Rapid Transit. BART. Yeah, it might as well say fart. Honestly, BART is like, you know, I mean, it's fucking useless. This is like back in the days before COVID, when you had the entertainment or anything in San Francisco where people are coming in to watch the opera, whatever you're watching, you're either going to, you know, BART stops at fucking like before midnight. It stops running, and then they clear everybody off to make certain that nobody's sleeping on it. And they do a piss poor job of that because there are homeless people who make a career of living on BART and sleeping on BART or in BART stations. And so basically you have the BART police, who have a jurisdiction of theoretically 1 mile in either direction from the BART tracks. And these clowns are some of the highest paid cops in the fucking world. And they've been known to commit atrocities because there's no police oversight. They don't work for any constabulary. They work for effectively like a trust, a board of trustees that is above and beyond the law in any conventional sense. So that's one of the, if you get a job like that, you can pull atrocities like they did and turn dogs loose on black people, homeless people, to eat them alive, and then you can literally get away with murder. I mean, this goes on and on with the BART history. People can look this sort of thing up. But when it comes to BART, it was considered at one time the most advanced public transportation system in the world. I mean, to think on that now is a joke. I mean, whatever time it had as that, which was shortly after they made the movie THX 1138, or George Lucas made the film THX 1138. So whatever time it spent in the sun after that movie was made, it must have been brief. I mean, like in the period of a few months before it was superseded by, rail systems in Japan as a far more advanced transportation system. I mean, that had to be in existence long before BART. So probably everything BART ever said about being, the most advanced transportation system on Earth at the time that it was put into effect was hyperbole. But aside from BART, they shut down at midnight. And they don't open up again till maybe 6 a.m. So you're fucking stuck. You come into the city, everything lasts till 11 after midnight. You go out for a few drinks after the opera, whatever it is that you're attending. You're seeing a show. Nothing's gonna get out before 11 midnight. Anything serious that you've invested into for entertainment, you're there to spend the night with people. And if you come in on BART, you're not going home. That's that's just a joke. and fuck them. I remember having to go to work in Oakland when they had the stupid, everybody was running for the stupid beta breakers. And I had to take a series of buses to get to Oakland because, you know, BART stopped for the beta breakers. It's just, you know, fuck them. None of these transportation systems nothing works in America. America is a third world shithole. Anybody who says, "Oh, if you don't love it, move someplace else," you're an idiot. The objective is to bitch about it so people understand things need to be fixed, or they're never going to be fixed. If you like living in a third world shithole when nothing works, then, you know, that's your prerogative. I want to bitch about it so that ultimately something is made to work. This is not the way it is right now. It's just awful. Anyhow, Marky Milk, when you write BART next time, make sure to capitalize all the letters. It's all uppercase because it's an acronym, Bay Area Rapid Transit. So he wrote that with an uppercase B and everything else was lowercase. So it looks like a name, like, you know, Big Bad Bart, the gunslinger in the Old West or something. So, all right, let's see if we can gather some more people here and check out the live stream. Let me see now. Do a reset here of this page. And, of course, anyone else wants to join Marky Milk in the chat room, please do so. Now, I think Marky Milk was he the gentleman coming in from Florida? I don't think he's Australia. So go ahead, you can identify if you wish the general area where you're coming in from. And in interim, you know, I might as well get started with MONologue. And just hope everybody comes in to listen to it later and catch themselves up. Now, I've already said that I myself, yesterday was Buddha Day, or the Buddha's birthday as celebrated in my own true homeland and heartland of Taiwan. And as I said, the Taiwanese are exceptional in the sense that they've hooked it up into being conjoined with Taiwanese Mother's Day. And they also have synchronized it to a kind of, how would I say it, something that's similar to Memorial Day or one of these holidays that happens specifically on a day that is meant to always provide you a 3-day weekend. You know, to the Taiwanese, they've fixed the Buddha's birthday to the second Sunday of May. And when it comes to the Japanese, no matter what day, it's April 8th. Both of these nation states, which were once a single nation state because the 100 islands of Formosa that now comprise the Nationalist Republic of China as reestablished on the Isles of Taiwan, was once part of Japan. And in terms of the you know, everyone else in East Asia, they all have their own traditions. Albeit, I believe that yesterday was also Buddha Day in South Korea, where it's a full-blown national holiday, despite the fact that you'll find almost nobody who's a Buddhist in South Korea, and almost everybody is some kind of radicalized evangelical fundamentalist Christian. Last people on earth you'd want to hang out with. Though, of course, that doesn't give the right of the Belgian ambassador's wife to go around slapping people in South Korea and then declaring diplomatic immunity. But, you know, what do you expect from white people, especially from the Belgians, who were responsible for proportionately some of the largest genocides in the world, yet these people play themselves off as victims of German aggression. You know, fuck all these people. They all eat shit. Really, they're, you know, these European people make me sick. And they deserve absolutely nothing in terms of sympathy or some kind of, you know, historical whitewashing, to use a pun, for all their crimes against humanity. Just because they're committing them all against non-whites makes them good guys. That's how they portray themselves in all the war films. Disgusting. They deserve everything Germany gave to them, and much, much more. hopefully we'll get it again just through the different situations that arise that are throwing us all into the challenges of dealing with a burning world. As I was saying, the most important part of the Buddha Day festival is the baptismal bathing of the Buddha as a baby, and this is done with these infant statues of Buddha that help people to basically balance themselves by a washing of the statue. And I myself have come to believe that our bathing the prince is a gesture of welcome to invite the baby bodhisattva into the suffering world and give thanks to him for coming. But it is, as I've said, something more. In the Chinese tradition, as I said, the lay people are invited to communally participate in the Dharma assembly of bathing the Buddha. But in the Mahayana tradition, Shakyamuni is the unique Buddha of this world, with many more simultaneously in others, like parallel time tracks. So Buddhism was quantum before there was quantum mechanics. And so Buddhists in the Mahayana tradition and people involved with their Dharma communities are invited to make offerings to establish fruitful karmic connections with infinite bodhisattvas. So the worship, prayer, and devotion will empower us all to beseech all Buddhas to aid them in the project of building peaceful communities of faith throughout the universe, a truly cosmological faith. Moreover, the ceremony itself is a manifestation of our filial thoughts toward the Buddha himself. When Shakyamuni Buddha was born, and as I said, Shakyamuni means he's the saint of the Shakya people. It's like Jesus Christ the Nazarene. You use this term as Jesus of Nazareth. So Buddha of Shakyamuni. Now Buddha is like Christ. It's a title. Christ is a title simply meaning anointed. Buddha is a title, enlightener. And Shakyamuni would be the saint of the Shakya, just as Christ, it would be similar to the title King of Kings for Christ or something like that. But when Shakyamuni Buddha was born, 9 dragons came to bathe him, so we follow their example and bathe the Buddha. We are Buddhist disciples, and so we should remember our teacher and be filial to him. I'm simply explaining this from the perspective of my fellow Taiwanese, and hopefully you can understand this and emulate it yourselves. Decide that you can go forth and bathe your baby Buddha in a little statue you can find perhaps in some Chinatown someplace or wherever else, that you can take one home with you so you can celebrate his birthday when it comes around on the calendar next time around next year, or somewhat belatedly for this year. It never hurts because, like I said, really, this is kind of like the Buddhist world has not yet settled on anything nearly as universal as what Christianity has with Christmas, where everybody's just flatly using the Gregorian calendar, and we all just say December the 25th, even though many people will try to argue until they're blue in the face that, that this is all a product of just later generations who have taken the birthday of the Christ and resettled it where they wanted it on top of a pagan holiday to counteract the pagan influences back in old Europe, and thereby establish the dominance of Christianity as the new incoming religion, with Yahweh, the one true God, as superseding all the other hosts and of the pantheons of Europe. Yet the meaning of bathing the image of the baby Buddha is multifaceted, a symbol of inner purification. The tradition is said to assist with the purgation of sins, wherein we guarantee to cultivate our spiritual maturity. We vow to attain purity of body, speech, and mind in the 3 times of past, present, and future. In the Chinese tradition, the vow is very ambitious, to be reborn life after life, to help suffering beings until one becomest a Bodhisattva, and then a Buddha. So that returns us to the question, why do we bathe the Buddha? Bathing the Buddha is a way of commemorating the day Shakyamuni Buddha was born. Why do so many people remember Shakyamuni Buddha's birthday at all? It's because in limitless aeons in the past, he himself bathed many other Buddhas. Bathing the Buddha now is for the future when you yourself become a Buddha. So this year in 2021, we welcomed little Siddhartha Gautama into our world again. It might have been his last rebirth 2,600 years ago, but I share the confidence of all Buddhists that he'll always be with us until all beings are freed from suffering. Is there a better friend, a more compassionate companion than someone who made a vow aeons ago to become one Buddha among many? The least we could do is give him a refreshing welcome. So, to kind of put this into a poetic form that you can remember, bathing the Buddha and bathing our minds, we return to purity. Taking food and taking medicine, we rid ourselves of illness. There is not a single speck of dust on the true self, as we said of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, removing that one black spot upon the heart from himself, or having had it removed through miracle. Walking, standing, sitting, and lying down, you are always in samadhi, the state of enlightenment with your environment. The Buddha Bath Day tradition, which of course is the inspiration for those of you who didn't hear the first part of tonight's transmission, for my sitting in the tub, as I am, in the photograph that we've embedded into the thumbnail of tonight's live stream, part 1 and 2. The Buddha Bath Day tradition itself was spread to China in the Eastern Han Dynasty of the period from 25 to 220 Anno Domini, from 25 to 220 years after Christ, and was brought to the region along the Silk Road. In the Han Dynasty, it was only celebrated in Buddhist temples, but soon it was widely accepted and practiced by ordinary people. The water sprinkling festival of the Dai and some other minority nationalities is said to have originated in this religious tradition. As in other Buddhist festivals, temple fairs are held, people chant and abstain from meat throughout the day. Yesterday, touching or sipping the bathing water is a tradition. And the holiday of Vesak also focuses on giving to others, giving unto others. For this reason, people take his part in acts of charity. To help others, they donate money and gifts to those in need. This is seen as a way to spread happiness and consider others. Forming ties is important on Buddha Bath Day, notably in Beijing, the ancient Forbidden City, the capital of mainland China. It's said that people come as to know each other because of the ties formed in previous lives. The tie is called yuan, like the word money, but it's pronounced the same way as round. Round soybeans symbolize forming ties. So on Sakyamuni's birthday, some people will carry cooked soybeans to the temple to form ties with the Buddha. Some woman will twiddle cooked soybeans while chanting to Buddha before the family shrine. Others will ask for yandu. These are Thai beans from every household on their way to the temple, whether they know the inhabitants or not. Offering soybeans is a way of forming ties in the next life. In ancient times, wealthy people often placed soybeans in a basket at their residence gate so passerby could collect them without bothering the people indoors, thus showing their hospitality and willingness to form ties with others. Depending on the country, there are a number of different traditions for Vesak, of course. In Thailand and Indonesia, special lanterns are made from paper and wood. Then they're hung from houses and trees. In China itself, there is a tradition of creating large, colorful dragons. They are carried through the streets in a parade. Now, some countries release caged birds into the air. They symbolize that all creatures should be free and happy. So we've got a day in which to share soybeans and make ties. This is, of course, the total opposite of white trash America with its real shitty attitude, in all of its ignorance, believing that soybeans will emasculate you. The so-called soy boy propaganda myth of deranged white supremacists who feel that somehow this lowers a man's ability to produce testosterone. A myth spread by Alex Jones and all the other crazies who think that the masculine thing to do is drink, hormone-saturated cow milk. Fucking idiots. Anyhow, in terms of animals, creatures living free and happy, being released on Buddha Day, Congress finally passed a bill to fight hate crimes against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Now, Congress approved legislation, but the day before yesterday, yesterday in effect, intended to curtail a striking rise in hate crimes against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, sending President Biden a bipartisan denunciation of the spate of brutal attacks that have proliferated during the coronavirus pandemic. But such having been done, which is good news, the red Republican insurgency has doubled down on denialism. Denialism is now a key Russo collaborationist red Republican strategy, and it's not going away anytime soon. Our country is still dealing with the consequences of Donald Trump's attempt to undermine the 2020 electoral results. In Arizona, Republican officials have forced a dubious audit of that state's ballots, and in Washington, D.C., the Russo collaborationist red Republican cult leaders are bucking an effort to establish a bipartisan commission investigating the January riot at the Capitol. Yesterday, the day before by now, well, basically yesterday, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell came out against the initiative, but the Democratic-led House voted to push it forward anyway. Just 35 of 211 Republicans joined them. So, the House voted the day before yesterday on setting up an independent bipartisan commission to investigate the Capitol insurrection. The decision exposed fissures among Republican leaders, some of whom have vehemently been downplaying the events of the 6th of January insurrection. The bill is the product of a bipartisan deal, so it was always likely to pass the Democratic-led House with a few Republican votes. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy had said he would vote against it, despite giving the go-ahead to fellow Russo collaborationist red Republican cult leader John Katko to negotiate it. That's definitely caused tension, and more drama will likely follow as the bill gets sent to the Senate. Several Senate Republicans have said they would vote for the bill, but given McCarthy's stance on it now, Minority Leader Mitch McConnell says he's pressed pause on whether to support it. The bottom line being that the red Republicans do not want to get to the bottom of what happened in the Capitol insurrection. Doing so would expose their own guilt and force them to choose between the truth and Donald Trump. The theme that connects the audit with the commission fight is Republican denialism. In Arizona, it's an unwillingness to acknowledge President Joe Biden's win. In the District of Columbia, it's an unwillingness to acknowledge the former president's singular role in inciting, instigating, inflaming the insurrection. When disasters like the assassination of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy or the 9/11 attacks happen, they are often followed by independent, bipartisan commissions set up to make sure such horrors do not reoccur. The riot on the 6th of January, a direct assault on American democracy itself, certainly rises to the level of such a panel. But after Republican and Democratic negotiators agreed on the makeup and rules of an investigation, the top Russo collaborationist Republican cult leader in the House, Kevin McCarthy, pulled out at the 11th hour. And his senatorial counterpart, Mitch McConnell, did the same, meaning that it is now highly unlikely that there will be a probe that could ever bring clarity and produce unassailable facts on what happened. To create the commission, Senate Democrats would need to find the support of 10 Republicans, and potential aisle crossers are all heading for the hills. Republican leaders complained the plan to launch the commission was overly partisan and would double up on ongoing criminal investigations. But it's obvious what's really going on. Any investigation would, beyond any shadow of a doubt, blame Trump's lies about election fraud and his own insurrectionist behavior for inciting the crowd that marched from a Washington rally on that fateful day and smashed its way into our Capitol. The panel would surely dwell on the abject behavior of scores of Republican lawmakers who voted against certifying Joe Biden's electoral win. McCarthy would probably be called before investigators to testify about his frantic call with Donald Trump, in which he demanded that the then president call off his mob. That would all be rather inconvenient, since McCarthy has since made up with the former president and is anchoring the midterm electoral campaign in which he hopes to win the speakership next year on Trump's cultists. So when the Democratic-led House voted to establish a commission yesterday, it looked like a symbolic act that was unlikely to be followed up in the Senate. The vote also underscored that one American political party, the Russo collaborationist Red Republican insurgency, is more interested in seizing power through Trump's personality cult than protecting democracy and the very sanctity of American elections. This is what brings us to the Civil War threats to come. The threat of civil war never ended with the Trump presidency. Donald John Trump's presidency was a product of our prison rape anti-culture's political polarization. But Trump himself pushed that polarization much further than it was before he took office. His actions during his final weeks in the White House Above all, his denial of his own loss in the 2020 election and his incitement of the insurrection against Congress's formal certification of electoral votes on the 6th of January brought our country to the brink. But the brink of what, you may ask? Most liberals and progressives assume we were facing a coup d'etat that would have kept Trump in office in defiance of both the popular and electoral college vote. That would have overturned American democracy in favor of a form of Russian-inspired authoritarianism. But that would not have been the end of the story. It would have been but the beginning, the start of a series of events that culminated in something that looks much more like a second American Civil War. That is the ominous possibility that we need to keep in mind as we advance toward turbulent elections of the future. The chilling events of the 6th of January were made possible by profoundly deep differences between Democrats and Republicans, not over policy or morals, but over reality itself. That was Trump's decisive contribution to our civic breakdown. On top of the substantive partisan disagreements that have piled up over the decades, Trump built on and radicalized the polemical style of right-wing conspiracy media, combining it with the lies and intentional distortions of a well-practiced con man who considers it unacceptable ever to concede a loss. Long-standing, low-grade paranoia on the radicalized right about voter fraud now became an outright conspiracy theory denying that any result other than a victory for Donald Trump could be considered legitimate. That got us to the insurrection on Capitol Hill. But the events that followed, dozens of Republicans voting against certification of state electoral votes, Trump's own continued denial of his obvious loss, the bulk of his cult in Congress punishing the few, daring to call out the former president's big lie, polls indicating that the Republican cultic base continues to believe in it, and state election officials who certified Biden's victory being replaced by Trump cultists prove that the story is not over. A significant chunk of the American electorate now resides in a completely alternative universe of facts about the nation's elections, while continuing to share the same political space with the rest of the country. What might that entail 4 and 8 years from now? The troubling truth is that precisely how events unfold will be a function not just of the margins between the candidates and which party controls Congress and the legislatures and governorships within the closest states, but also of which party holds the White House at the time. Let's assume, for the sake of a thought experiment, that the 2024 election pits Joseph Biden against Donald Trump or a Trumpist cultic Republican, that Biden prevails in the popular vote by a healthy margin, that the Electoral College is decided by 3 states controlled by Republican cult officials, where Biden prevailed by just a couple of percentage points, and that the Russo collaborationist red insurgent Republican Party controls a majority of the state delegations to the House of Representatives. In such scenario, the 3 key state legislatures, citing unsubstantiated stories of electoral fraud, refuse to certify the official slate of Democratic electors and appoint an alternatives slate ready to vote for the Republican cultic candidate. This would throw the Electoral College itself into chaos, requiring the House to assume responsibility for the final outcome. Now, unfortunately, Republicans, based on the history of midterm elections, are favored to take control of the House in 2022, but already they control a majority of the state delegations. That will very likely still be true on January 6th, 2025, which means that they could declare the Republican the victor even when Joseph Biden again wins the popular vote and the Electoral College, though they would, of course, be claiming to be acting on the conviction that in reality Biden lost the key states and so also fell short of the required electoral votes. What would happen then? As the incumbent who actually legally won the election and already holds the powers of the presidency, Biden would be in a strong position to appeal to a majority of the population to support his efforts to remain in office, as well as to the leadership of key institutions, including the military, police, executive branch, departments and agencies, and big business. But this doesn't mean that sentiment within these institutions would be unanimous. A sizable minority of the population, as well as elements within these corrupted institutions, might break from the president and support his Republican cultic rival instead. How far would that opposition go? Would the bulk of our population relent and accept Biden's victory, leaving dissenters vastly outnumbered? Or would it be a closer call, with the minority feeling emboldened in its rejection of the president and his self-evident victory? That would be the most precarious moment for American democracy since the election of 1860. But it's nothing compared to what could happen 4 years later, in the aftermath of the 2028 election. If we assume Biden prevails in 2024 by a wide enough margin that the country avoids the kind of scenario I've just laid out, and then remains president until the end of his second term, we would be facing an election with no incumbent president able to use the momentum of his already established powers to steady the body politic. That could produce a situation in which a still narrowly divided country finds it impossible to reach consensus on which of the two candidates is the rightful and legitimate victor of the contest to succeed Joseph Biden. Congress, state governments, the military, the police, business leaders, the media, all of them could be deeply and sharply split over which side to support. That's the direction in which we be irrevocably headed. Not toward the imposition of dictatorial rule, but toward something like its opposite. A cascading breakdown of authority as this country and its citizenry, already residing in completely antithetical realities, breaks apart into rival camps and finds ourselves incapable of reaching even the most minimal agreement required for functional and stable governance and the very maintenance of rudimentary public order. When our nation gets to that point, it has already slipped beyond the bounds of normal politics into the twilight world of outright dysfunction and the settling of disputes by violence instead of ballots. We cannot knowest for certain if this will be our fate. What we do know is that the potential is most certainly there, lurking largely in the shadows of our civic life and haunting the national elections that await us. It's worth remembering, too, that the last time House Republicans held a vote to remove Elizabeth Cheney, in early February, they not only held a roll call vote, but also released the results. Cheney won that vote by 145 to 61. Why then hold a voice vote only this time around? As I've articulated before, my educated guess is that McCarthy and Scalise wanted to show as much of a united party as possible, and a voice vote was their best possible route to achieve that goal. There were no numbers involved and no recorded votes, meaning that reporters can never follow up with each individual member and ask how they voted, because there was no fucking vote. With stakes this high, the attempt to paper over who exactly wanted Cheney gone and who may have wanted her to stay is an act of political cowardice that they didn't even feel as though they owed Elizabeth Cheney a formal vote, so she herself could see who exactly wanted her gone. Speaks to just how much they think of Darth Vader's daughter, Elizabeth Cheney. The answer? Not much. It is to her credit that she stood up to Donald Trump, but with the Middle East erupting again, let's be careful that we don't also embrace her bellicose foreign policy views. This is what brings us to the subject of Cheneyism, the larger lesson of Elizabeth Cheney's ouster, and the reason why she must never become president should she run in response to her expulsion. Nobody should mistake Liz Cheney's excommunication from the leadership of the Republican conference in the House of Representatives for a sign that she is headed out of her party to some unknown, possibly moderate political destination. Cheney grew up in a firmly reactionary and politically partisan household and never noticeably rebelled. She has been in the family business, the mafia of government, since she was in her 20s. And she will run next year to keep the Wyoming seat that her father, Dick Darth Vader Cheney, held for years. The cause of her divorce from her House colleagues is not some incipient shift in her core identity. It is simply Donald Trump. Cheney has said that she voted for Trump in November, but it could not have been with enthusiasm. His florid, undisciplined style and utter lack of interest in the details of statecraft are about as unlike Cheney as you can get. So is the abject terror of most House Republicans at the prospect of incurring Trump's displeasure. Cheney is willing to say publicly that Trump's final innings were unacceptable, and that is to her credit. On policy, if you had to say who's farther to the right, Cheney or Trump, it would probably be Cheney. The difference shows up most obviously in foreign policy, where Cheney, like her father, is a committed war hawk and a believer in the aggressive abuse of American power. And that doesn't mean soft power around the world. Her most recent book, which she co-wrote with her father, is entitled Exceptional and subtitled Why the World Needs a Powerful America. It may as well be titled Fuck Everybody, Let's Conquer the World. She consistently opposed Trump's inclination to bring home American troops who have been on long deployments abroad. A harbinger of her vote to impeach Trump in January was her vote in December to override his veto of a defense bill that would have slowed his efforts to remove American forces from Afghanistan and Die Neue Deutschland, the new United Germany. Trump, for his part, liked to call Cheney a warmongeress. The Republican Party cult has always uneasily encompassed both isolationists and interventionists. Right now, it may look as if the significance of Cheney's expulsion from the party cult's leadership is that it demonstrates Trump's continuing dominance. In the longer run, the more important message may be that interventionists have no place in the party anymore. Neo-reactionaries, the Russo collaborationist Red Insurgency's most visibly hawkish cohort in the 21st century, have always been deeply uncomfortable with Donald Trump. Bill Kristol, perhaps the best-known neocon and a longtime ally of Liz Cheney's, they co-founded an organization called Keep America Safe, endorsed Joe Biden for president. But hawks are now homeless in both parties, actually, and that poses a challenge to Joe Biden, whose tendencies are non-isolationist but also quite un-Cheney-like. The Republican megadonor Charles Koch recently teamed up with George Soros to start the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, dedicated to reversing the American pursuit of military dominance. The voting base of each party is even less drawn to Cold War internationalism than the funding elite is. Perhaps the only thing Barack Obama and Donald Trump have in common is that public reaction against the Iraq War, of which Dick Cheney was a key architect and Liz Cheney a strong supporter, helped put both of them in the White House. Even if Trump somehow lost his grip on Republican primary voters, few Russo collaborationist red Republican insurgent office holders would feel safe in espousing the kind of foreign policy that Liz Cheney likes, and the Democrats won't find it easy to convince their voters that they can engage vigorously around the world in more productive ways. Surely, the last place the Biden administration would have chosen for a tryout of its preferred international role is Israel and Gaza, which were engulfed in violence the week before last. The Middle East offers red Republicans a rare opportunity to demonstrate bellicosity without straying into the Trump-era danger zone of committing American forces abroad. They can react to what looks like the beginning of a war simply by saying, as Liz Cheney did on Twitter, Septimania, sometime last week or before, "America stands with Israel!" Biden intended to depart from the practice of his predecessors by not staging a highly public initiative in the region. He has distanced himself from Benjamin Netanyahu's government, which Trump embraced uncritically, with the aim of showing that low-profile American engagement can promote peace and justice. you can get a sense of what the Biden administration would like to achieve in the world from an article that Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, co-wrote with the prominent neoconservative Robert Kagan back in the year before yesteryear, 2019. They began by noting ruefully that President Trump's America First foreign policy, or its progressive cousin, retrenchment, is broadly popular in both parties. At the announcement of his appointment, Blinken told a story about how, when his late stepfather, a Holocaust survivor, was rescued by an American tank in Bavaria in 1945, he got down on his knees and said the only 3 words that he knew in English that his mother taught him before the war: God bless America. Now, Antony Blinken's paternal grandfather, who fled Russian pogroms, was an important advocate of the creation of the State of Israel. This is not the perspective of any retrenching. Yet the Biden administration, so ambitious in domestic policy, has been far quieter in foreign policy. It has clearly paid close attention to Trump's success at tapping into the populist resentment of, to use one of his favorite terms, globalists. The Blinken-Kagan article criticized the Obama administration, in which Blinken served for doing too little in Syria, and criticized Trump for pulling out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But Biden has not reversed those policies, or has dramatically rejected most of Trump's other foreign policy positions, including his intention to end the American presence in Afghanistan. In recent years, foreign policymakers in both parties have engendered public mistrust, presiding over not just endless wars, but also a spectacular collapse of the global economy, a poorly handled immigration crisis, and, most recently, a pandemic that didn't have to be anywhere near as devastating as it was. It's going to be a daunting task for the Biden administration to create a meaningfully different new role, a new role for America, one that entails neither withdrawing from the world nor vainly attempting to assert dominance. Israel has now presented itself as a test case, and it offers a good example of the limitations of the impulse to celebrate Elizabeth Cheney. Better to endorse her stance on Trump and to find a part for the American empire to play in Southwest Asia, i.e. the Middle East to Americans, that involves trying to reduce bloodshed and suffering, not provoking it. That's what brings us to competing priorities. Can Joseph Biden pivot to Asia while Israel and Gaza burn? Can Joe Biden finally put the Middle East in check and fucking pivot already? The new administration, like all previous ones, has a Middle East quagmire. But it's been trying some nuanced maneuvers to break free. It's been just under 10 years since then Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton declared to Foreign Policy magazine that the American pivot to Asia after a decades-long focus on the Middle East was to finally come to pass. That didn't last long. Soon thereafter, the Arab Spring uprisings forced the Middle East back into the center of American foreign policy. Then came the civil wars in Syria and Libya. Next was the eruption of ISIS in their creation of a fundamentalist caliphate, the Islamic State. All the while, there were nuclear negotiations with Iran, a cascade of events that ensured that the Middle East, as it had for former presidents Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and certainly his son, would exert inexorable pull on the Obama administration. Like former presidents Barack Obama and Donald Trump, U.S. President Joe Biden hoped to downgrade the Middle fucking East in favor of finally waging a strategic competition with the ever-emergent Communist Chinese Empire, which Biden said would be the most consequential challenge of his presidency. But just when you think you're out, the Judeo-Mafia pulls you back in to that Mediterranean tar baby, and you're quagmired up to your ass in a bunch of people who are an absolute minority in the world and yet demand all of the world's attention all of the fucking time. The first test came in mid-February when Iranian-backed Shiite militias fired rockets at an American airbase in northern Iraq, killing a Filipino contractor and injuring an American serviceman, or service member, or depriving him of the use of his member from that point forward. Since Biden's inauguration, Iran has targeted not only American forces in Iraq, as it has for years, but also launched attacks against Saudi oil fields, airports, and other facilities. Biden took time to respond, but there were no unenforced red lines, angry tweets, or saber-rattling rhetoric, just a carefully targeted strike on a Syrian crossing used by Iranian-backed militias to launch attacks across the border on American forces, and a muted United States Defense Department statement saying President Biden will act to protect American and coalition personnel. If Obama was all carrot and Trump was all stick, then Biden seems to favor a healthier mix of engagement and dialogue. It was a deliberate pawn advance in the administration's chess game, not a reckless charge. The attack was a warning that the United States was not to be trifled with, but was not so severe that it closed the door to diplomacy. Indeed, Biden launched the strikes at the same time that his administration offered to relaunch talks with Iran over salvaging the 2015 nuclear deal, sending a clear message to Tehran that attacks on United States personnel or its allies would not be tolerated, but that dialogue remained the endgame. Now, as I said, if Obama was all carrot and Trump was all stick, then this is a far more productive synthesis of engagement and dialogue, leavened with surgical strikes on proxies, continued sanctions, and diplomatic pressure. Biden wants to get back to the deal that Trump abandoned, and even offered to engage in European-led dialogue before Iran had come back into compliance with the deal's nuclear restrictions, but understands that doing so without responding to Iran's other destabilizing activities in region doesn't improve his chances. Biden's national security team has many of the same faces as the Obama administration, but they all know this is not 2015. Israel is normalizing ties with several of Iran's Gulf neighbors. The COVID-19 pandemic, a sustained period of low oil prices, and the Trump misadministration's maximum pressure campaign have all put Tehran on the defensive. Today, Iran needs the nuclear deal far more than the United States does. But Biden's problems in the Middle East aren't limited to bringing Iran back into line. He also wants to end the Saudi-led war in Yemen, which has created a humanitarian catastrophe. Washington needs Saudi Arabia to do both. At the same time, however, the president, who called Saudi Arabia a pariah while a candidate, wants to recalibrate a relationship that grew too cozy and in some senses out of date under the last misadministration. If Obama overpromised and underdelivered, especially when it came as to the House of Saud, and Donald Trump simply adopted a see no evil, hear no evil approach toward Saudi leadership and human rights abuses, Biden's trying to thread a middle ground. He announced a review on the huge arms sales that the Trump administration had pushed through, including against congressional opposition. Unlike Trump, Biden has returned head of state level discussions to where they belong, with the current king of the House of Saud, and relegated Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to his rightful place as the counterpart of United States Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. And last week, or the week before, the Biden administration finally released the intelligence assessment, mandated by Congress but buried by Trump, on the brutal murder and dismemberment of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi. The report determined that Mohammed bin Salman, the country's de facto leader, ordered the killing, given the direct involvement of security officials close to him and his ironclad control over the country, the kingdom. Yet Biden opted to impose sanctions against officials believed to be involved in the Khashoggi killing, but not the Crown Prince himself. Similarly, when Biden announced an end to American support for the Saudi war in Yemen, he suggested the United States take as a leading role in forging a diplomatic solution to the conflict, naming a veteran diplomat as a special envoy for the issue who is well respected in Riyadh and pledged to protect Saudi security interests. So, our president, it seems, is not just recalibrating. He's calibrating. It is a classic case of balancing interests and values, one of the central tenets of foreign policy. If Biden can work with Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin, who both have blood on their hands and whose countries have directly threatened American interests, why should he sever the United States' relationship with a key Arab ally and its future king? The House of Saud, for all its flaws and ups and downs in the relationship, has remained a strategic partner of the United States since the waning days of World War II, after all. Of course, I am not happy with this and would take every maneuver that I could initiate towards the fall of the House of Saud and the expulsion of all of their sheikhs to the four corners of the fucking earth. But Biden is acting in the interests of empire and not humanity. Now, Trump's cruise control approach to the region created openings for both the Red Revanchist and Revisionist Russian Empire and the Communist Chinese Empire to play a bigger role in the Middle East than they ever have before. Some foreign policy experts want the American empire to play hardball with Mohammed bin Salman, perhaps in a bid to change the dynastic destiny of the kingdom, which I would simply overthrow. That would likely be a mistake in a smoother running attempt at maintaining world order that Biden is trying to assume, given MBS's or Mohammed bin Salman's public profile, huge popularity with young people, and despite it all, reputation as a moderate reformer, laughable though that be, but comparatively almost justified in light of the norms of the House of Saud. He has made tentative steps toward reform in areas like women's rights, and he might, unlike his father, normalize ties with Israel, making him, despite his flaws, a bulwark still in the eyes of an old man like Joseph Biden. But more to the point, the Trump misadministration's entire approach towards simply surrendering to the Kingdom of Saud and its Israeli ally is what made the Red, Revanchist, and Revisionist Russian Empire the kingmaker in Syria, while the Communist Chinese Empire strengthened its political and economic partnerships across the Middle East throughout the Trump administration, including a growing partnership with Iran, for whom it made massive purchases of crude oil in violation of all American sanctions. The Biden administration, like the one before it, wants to confront great power rivals, but Washington invited them into the Middle Eastern sandbox via our last catastrophic presidency. When he was confirmed as Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken laid out the Biden administration's foreign policy priorities as first, foremost, and above all else, as everyone has been trying forever, Asia-Pacific. Then rapprochement with European allies. And finally, the Western Hemisphere. But past weeks have shown that the Middle East remains, as it has for decades, the region where American troops and resources, if not direct interests, face the greatest risks. Every American president since Dwight David Eisenhower has found himself mired in the Middle East's toxic cocktail of nation-state conflicts, religious extremism, and superpower intervention that frustrates the United States' broader agendas. If Biden wants to truly focus on Red China's hegemonic ambitions, he has to, once and for all, extricate the American empire from its never-ending cycle of Mideastern entanglements. Creating a new balance of power, even if that means treading a fine line between idealism and realism, could help get him there. American President Joseph Biden was hoping to avoid the thorny Israeli-Palestinian issue and focus his attention on Asia, but now both Israel and Gaza are under fire. The Biden administration wants to downgrade the region, but violence between Israelis and Palestinians is dragging the American empire back into a conflict it hoped to avoid as it refocuses attention away from the mud and blood of the Middle East. According to the White House itself, U.S. President Joe Biden sought to increase pressure on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to end the violence in the Middle East yesterday, telling the Israeli leader midweek that he expected a significant de-escalation today. This is what he said yesterday, on the path to a ceasefire. But though Hamas officials informed the American press that a ceasefire seemed imminent, Netanyahu has given no public sign that he's committed to de-escalation. Yesterday saying that he appreciated Biden's support, but that Israel's military operation in Gaza will continue until its objective is achieved. But wait, didn't Trump bring peace to the Middle East? One of the political consequences of the ongoing violence between Israel and Hamas has been to expose the former American misadministration's glib claims for its diplomatic legacy. The Trump misadministration played a key role in facilitating normalization deals between Israel and several Arab states that shared common concerns about Iranian power, and they may well have enhanced American national interests, as the current administration has said. But these pacts, now under pressure as Gaza reels from relentless Israeli airstrikes, were never the epochal breakthrough that a president desperate for success once claimed. In 2018, after moving the American embassy in Israel to the Holy City, where the current unrest originated, the then American president said, "We have taken Jerusalem, the toughest part of the negotiation, off the table." An expansive proclamation written in the Wall Street Journal in March by Trump's son-in-law and top Middle East negotiator, Jared Kushner, that reads, "The Abraham Accords exposed the conflict as nothing more than a real estate dispute between Israelis and Palestinians that need not hold up Israel's relations with the broader Arab world," was similarly deconstructed by recent events. Trump partisans who hyped his peace maneuvers are blaming his successor, Joe Biden, for inflaming the conflict, even though the current president has deferred to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's strategic goals in the fighting. You can make an opposing case that Trump's indulgence of the prime minister over issues like building settlements actually fueled the tensions that have exploded now. The idea the Trump misadministration could simply declare moot age-old territorial disputes and Palestinian dreams of sovereignty, and a prospective state with part of Jerusalem as its capital, was never realistic. The whole real estate narrative advanced by the two New York property titans was frankly offensive. On CNN, former U.S. Middle East peace negotiator Aaron David Miller said, "Mr. Trump thought he was taking Jerusalem off the table. Well, guess what? Jerusalem has become the table." This Israel-Hamas conflict isn't quite like all the others. When videos of Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system swinging into action began flooding social media platforms earlier this week last, the week before it, it all seemed like a case of déjà vu. But there was one major difference compared to other recent episodes of rocket fire from Palestinian militants in Gaza. This time, the novelty was not the Iron Dome system and its efficacy in intercepting incoming missiles, but rather the fact that Hamas and other armed groups in Gaza were sending over massive volleys of rockets in an attempt to breach the system's saturation point and break through its defenses. It was hard not to see that as a metaphor for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict itself, which over the past 5 years faded in importance in Washington under the Trump misadministration, as well as in Arab circles around the Middle East, where the officials were eager to partner with Israel in what they saw as a more urgent regional standoff with Iran. But despite assurances from former President Donald Trump, his son-in-law and principal Middle East advisor Jared Kushner, and others, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict did not go away just because one side's grievances were downgraded and ignored. The events of the past week or two represent the saturation point, when the tensions that had been lying dormant finally broke through again. In a briefing on Thursday, Barnaby Papadopoulos looked at the proximate causes of what has now become as the worst outbreak of violence between Israel and Hamas since 2014, while also examining the potential political fallout for Israel and the Palestinian Authority, and the broader geopolitical implications for the Arab countries that had signed normalization agreements with Israel despite widespread misgivings among their publics about abandoning the Palestinians as cause. Previously, Barnaby examined the Trump administration's record on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the prospects for President Joe Biden of repairing the damage done in an in-depth article from February, published, I believe, in either Foreign Policy magazine or Foreign Affairs. Can't remember where I reviewed it, but what I do remember was that Barnaby explained this week, or the week before, that Hamas's decision to launch missiles came in response to Israel's heavy-handed suppression of protests that had broken out in East Jerusalem, including in the Al-Aqsa Mosque complex over planned evictions of Palestinian families from a neighborhood there. But the timing of the fighting was particularly significant. For Netanyahu, it came as just as an opposition coalition was finally poised to assemble the parliamentary majority needed to oust him from power after 12 years in office and 4 inconclusive elections in 2 years. But that coalition required the cooperation of an Israeli Arab Islamist party, RAIM. RAAM. Even if RAIM didn't formally enter the government, its participation in a partnership agreement would have represented a historic breakthrough for Arab political parties in Israel, whose mainstreaming was one of the major outcomes of the most recent Israeli elections. Had the coalition proceeded, RAIM's newfound leverage to perhaps improve the quality of Israeli Arabs' lives would have provided a powerful alternative to Hamas's narrative of armed resistance to Israel as the only means of advancing the Palestinian cause. The outbreak of hostilities torpedoed the coalition agreement, saving Netanyahu's wretched skin by putting Israel back on track to call yet another election. Fighting with the Palestinians gave Israel's Netanyahu a political lifeline. Prior to the events of this week, the movement for Palestinian self-determination faced a moment of reckoning, with the prospects of a negotiated two-state agreement now considered by almost all observers as past its expiration date, and an older generation of Palestinian leaders discredited by their failures. Palestinians, especially among the younger generation, had begun to rethink the path forward. The emerging consensus is that a one-state solution, in which Palestinians in the occupied territories would become fully enfranchised citizens in a state comprising both Israel and Palestine, seems to offer the greatest chance for success. But achieving that will require a new political imagination on both sides, meaning new leadership that's not coming with the militarily dictatorial powers Netanyahu can now impose. Ultimately, what will result in the conflict that will cascade would be a two-state solution comprising the division of Israel. In the meantime, as always, the brunt of the current fighting is being borne by civilians on both sides, whether Israelis deliberately targeted by Hamas or Palestinians caught in the crossfire of Israel's retaliatory strikes. Another noticeable difference between this round of fighting and previous ones is on display in these United States, where coverage and commentary about the fighting has taken on a tone that is, if not outright critical of the American status quo position in support of Israel, slave-circuited thereunto, at least more questioning thereof. The Biden administration's boilerplate statements supporting Israel's right to self-defense have hit a false note, it seems, in light of Biden's commitment to democracy promotion and human rights. Israel's policies toward Palestinians, whether in Israel itself or in the occupied territories, are also under more scrutiny in an America that over the past year has been confronted with its own racism. As Howard French wrote in a June 2020 column that I reviewed on foreign policy, that racism has often tarnished America's reputation abroad, but the effort to combat it also serves as a boost to American soft power in unexpected ways. A refusal to hold Israel accountable for its own treatment of Palestinians, even as the Biden administration has harshly criticized Red China and revisionist, revanchist Russia for human rights abuses committed by their governments, would open Biden and the American empire up to charges of rank hypocrisy. As for Israel itself, its war will never end. For Israelis and Palestinians, ethnic violence isn't a temporary problem. It's now a lasting identity. Much of the imagery and reporting coming out of Jerusalem, central Israel, and the Gaza Strip in recent days has been stomach-turning. The emerging mainstream narrative is that it is all the fault of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is trying to capitalize on the tension and violence in his struggle to remain Prime Minister forever. The Palestinian Authority, the PA's president, Mahmoud Abbas, for being inept, and the Hamas leadership for pouring gas on a fire to advance its own political interests. There is truth to these assessments. Netanyahu and Hamas have both potentially much to gain from the violence. But the convulsions that began with the evictions of Palestinian families in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood of Jerusalem speak as to something deeper and more profound. Two communities engaged in a struggle to deny each other's identity. There is not anything particularly new about this, of course. But in the years since the 2014 Gaza conflict, there was a sense among Israelis and Americans that while the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians was not at an end, it was contained. This view was only reinforced with last summer's Abraham Accords. Israel, it seemed, could render Palestine a local issue by dint of force, the PA's own vast shortcomings, and the confluence of geostrategic interests among Israeli leaders and their counterparts in a variety of Arab countries, uniting in a front against Iran. Yet, the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians is, at its core, about identity, and thus its mutual denial by the antagonists. This cannot be wished away or smoothed over by well-meaning diplomats armed with confidence-building measures, security guarantees, and development aid. It is why the hope that, during the periodic spasms of violence between Israelis and Palestinians, each will look over the abyss and avoid the worst outcome, is so misplaced. At each moment when the rockets and artillery stop, Israelis and Palestinians are never closer to figuring out how to exist together because they willfully and collectively refuse to recognize the legitimate existence of each the other. Among the more horrifying images coming out of Israel in recent days was video from a traffic roundabout in the city of Lod, where Israeli Jews were stoning the cars of their fellow citizens who are Palestinian. This came just after an Israeli Jewish gunman killed a Palestinian citizen of Israel, and two others, also in Lod, as Arab citizens hoisted the Hamas flag, attacked a synagogue, and declared their intention to free Palestine. Lod was not the only case of violence, as Israelis, Jews, and Arabs were swept up in intercommunal violence in Ramleh, Acre, Nazareth, Haifa, and the picturesque Jaffa. The situation in Lod got so bad that border police had to be redeployed from the West Bank to try to restore order. It should be quite clear that even after 73 years of efforts not necessarily to integrate Palestinians into Israeli society but to undermine their identity have failed. It was bound to. Historical memory is strong, and simply calling Palestinians Israeli Arabs, using a fake Arabic word for Jerusalem, and destroying villages was not going to erase it. Inside the Green Line, Palestinians regard themselves as a remnant of the population that existed before Israel's creation, and thus they share with their cousins in the West Bank and Gaza Strip an identity bound up in dispossession and loss. Why Palestinian citizens of Israel are in the streets now, and were not before, is hard to know for sure, but clearly the combination of events in Jerusalem stirred them to reassert who they are against the power of a state and society whose very existence denies them their reality. This is not to condone violence, but an effort to try to understand where it comes from in this instance. On the other side, of course, are Israelis who are deeply committed to the historical connection between Jews and the land, the practical and logical outcome of Zionism. The state of Israel itself would not have been possible in, for example, Uganda, because the religious dimension and its pull was simply absent. Uganda being one of the places that Israelis considered to establish their ethno-state, their racially pure kingdom on earth. Israel's founders were secular-minded, but they understood that without the biblical connection to the land, their claim to it was no better than that of its Arab inhabitants. In this context, the ongoing effort among the Palestinian leadership and supporters of Palestine to undermine that history of which there be ample evidence for the actual Semitic Jews, is not an attack on Israel, but on Israeli identity, as synthetic that it be. The response is manifest in the Israeli government's efforts, along with much of those of international Jewry, the diaspora worldwide, to underscore the existence of Jewish nationhood centered around Jerusalem, oftentimes with a fervor and ferocity, precisely because Palestinians and their supporters deny the legitimacy of these claims. Israelis will neither give up nor apologize for who they are, which is how the evictions of families in Sheikh Jarrah, the stoning of their Arab neighbors, and indiscriminate airstrikes become as possible. The proposals, plans, and roadmaps for resolving the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians can fill a room from floor to ceiling. Yet for all the time and effort that went into these ideas, they have never come as close to bringing peace. Why? There has been bad faith and politics on all sides that have made it more difficult, to be sure, but the broader problem is connected to identity. For either side to concede on any core issue, Jerusalem, refugees, right of return, borders, is to place their identity in jeopardy. Isn't Jerusalem the eternal capital of Israel and the central focus of Jewish life? Then how can it be shared? How can one have a Palestinian state without Jerusalem as its capital? The Palestinian right of return will dilute the Jewish identity of Israel. The right of return that Jews enjoy as a result of Israeli law further threatens to overwhelm and erase Palestinian identity. In this context, it is hard to take as seriously the idea that the United States can mediate the conflict, though there are certainly those who will insist that we try. I can tell you this much: no peace process means no peace. And if Palestinians have no hope of a capital in East Jerusalem, Israelis will have little hope of normality. In this context, it should be seen that the Republicans tried to cancel Elizabeth Cheney. They may have launched her presidential bid instead, because now we have anti-Trump Republicans threatening a third party. In terms of rationals versus radicals. This was inevitable at some period of time. And, of course, it will be the death of the Republican Party. It's no exaggeration if a third party is formed, neither the third party nor the Republicans will ever have any chance of winning. So we must pray for the over 100 former Republican officials who signed a letter on Thursday of Yester Septimania, last week, declaring that if the Republican Party does not break with former President Donald Trump and change course, they would back the creation of a third party. Now, this letter was headlined, "A Call for American Renewal," and 'twas an exploratory maneuver toward forming a breakaway party, or so two of its organizers said. The group is dismayed by what it says is a modern Republican Party driven by its allegiance to Donald Trump, who continues to falsely claim the 2020 election was stolen from himself. Miles Taylor, one of the organizers, wrote, "The Republican Party is broken. It's time for a resistance of the rationals against the radicals." Now, Miles Taylor, while serving in the Trump White House, wrote an anonymous opinion piece in the New York Times published in 2018, what was headlined, "I am part of the resistance inside the Trump administration." Now, this group first raised their threat in February, following the deadly January 6th attack on our American Capitol by Trump cultists to try to disrupt the legal congressional certification of Democrat Joe Biden's presidential election victory. The letter itself highlights the wide intra-party rift over Donald Trump. Most Republicans remain fiercely loyal to the former president. House Republicans did as expected midweek last, the week before, to oust Representative Liz Cheney from her number 3 party leadership position within the chamber because of her refusal to embrace Trump's election claims and her move to back Trump's second impeachment after the Capitol riot. And the letter signatories, who include former ambassadors, governors, congressional members, and cabinet secretaries, want the Republican Party to return to principled leadership and reject division and conspiracy theories, or face a new party dedicated to fighting for Republicans such as Cheney and against fear-mongering and lies. Backers of the reform group include former Republican governors Tom Ridge, Christine Todd Whitman, George W. Bush-era Transportation Secretary Mary Peters, and former House members Charlie Dent, Barbara Comstock, Reid Ribble, and Mickey Edwards. They may face an uphill battle in getting any current Republican office holders to sign on, including Cheney herself, who in February rejected the idea of a third party, saying it would empower Democrats, which it will. A spokesman for Trump named Jason Miller said, "These losers left the Republican Party when they voted for Joe Biden." Now, Evan McMullin, a former chief policy director for the House Republican Conference and an independent presidential candidate in 2016, said if the Republican Party does not reject lies and extremism, part of it will have no choice but to part ways with it and build something new. He's so saying, we're excited about that prospect, as am I, because this would guarantee forevermore, for the foreseeable future, a Democratic victory. Now, in terms of the what we're dealing with now at this point in history, what we've got most recently is the House Minority Leader's role in ousting Liz Cheney, telling us about the troubled future of our republic. Somebody should tell Kevin McCarthy that Donald Trump is still lying about the 2020 election. On Wednesday of Yester Septimania last week, rather the week before last, the week before Yester Septimania, which is now this week last, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy walked up to a microphone in the driveway of the White House, wearing a pink tie, a blue suit, and no mask because, he said, "I believe in the vaccine." He and the 3 other congressional leaders had just met together with President Biden for the first time since he took office, for the first time, in fact, since McCarthy had joined a majority of his House Russell collaborationist Red Republican Cultic Caucus in voting not to accept the results of the election that Biden won. Just before arriving at the White House, McCarthy had presided over a 16-minute Republican conference meeting at which his members booed the party's third-ranking House leader, the Wyoming Representative Liz Cheney, and dumped her by voice vote from her leadership position. Her crime was refusing to go along with Donald Trump's lies about the 2020 election. All of this made McCarthy's answer to the very first question from reporters truly remarkable. Asked if he accepted the legitimacy of Biden's win, McCarthy responded, "I don't think anybody is questioning the legitimacy of the presidential election. I think that is all over with." There was no follow-up to this statement. No instant fact check. No one, as far as I can ascertain, even laughed aloud. The press conference moved on, as press conferences do. McCarthy and his Senate counterpart, Mitch McConnell, talked about Biden's proposed infrastructure bill and their opposition to tax increases to pay for it, with McCarthy saying, "Non-starter." They talked about the threat of inflation, blaming it on the trillions of public dollars that Biden and the Democrats want to pump into our economy. It all sounded like Washington as usual, except for one thing. What McCarthy said on the White House driveway was not true. Not even close to true. In fact, the continued questioning of the legitimacy of Biden's election by Trump and the party that embraces him is why getting back to Washington as usual 6 full months after the presidential election that Trump lost to Biden by 7 million votes and a decisive electoral college majority is nowhere close to happening. The 2020 presidential contest, as Trump himself said in one of his many recent statements on the matter from his poolside exile in Palm Beach, was marred by the greatest election fraud in the history of our country. It was a fake presidential election, he said. It was the fraudulent presidential election of 2020, he said. It was rigged and stolen from us, he said. Not only was our election the greatest fraud in the history of our country, Trump added, it was an even greater hoax than Russia, Mueller, impeachment hoax number 1, impeachment hoax number 2, or any of the other many scams the Democrats pulled. In other words, he concluded, it was the most tainted and corrupt election in American history. And these were just Trump's comments in the week before last. Trump has been banned by both Twitter and Facebook for his ongoing lies about last year's presidential race. But that has not stopped the flow of daily emails from him, mostly aimed either at questioning the results in various states that Biden won, or seeking revenge against those Republicans, such as Liz Cheney and bad news Mitt Romney, who had chosen to challenge him on this basic question of faith in the American constitutional system. By my own count, Trump has called out Cheney by name in 6 different statements so far this month. The former president has said she is a warmonger and a big shot warmonger, a warmongering fool, and a bitter, horrible human being. Must have been looking in the mirror when he said that one, but he admitted in one of his rants that his real issue with Liz Cheney has nothing to do with foreign policy and everything to do with his own election lies. The week before last, Trump complained, "She continues to unknowingly and foolishly say there is no election fraud in the 2020 presidential election," before endorsing Elise Stefanik, who was always favored to replace Cheney once the House Republicans chose the new conference chair, as they did Friday into last weekend. Stefanik has enthusiastically embraced Trump's election skepticism, which Cheney has told reporters in an interview right after her purging from the Republican leadership that the party risks destroying itself on a foundation of lies. It is in this context, and this one alone, that one must consider McCarthy's statement in front of the White House on Wednesday of the week before last. McCarthy and so many in the Republican Party are amplifying a long-running and extremely successful Russian-sponsored disinformatia, or disinformation campaign, run operationally by Donald Trump on our home soil to attack the legitimacy of our American elections and even to excuse the assault on the peaceful transfer of power that a mob of Trump cultists carried out on the 6th of January. Some 70% of Republicans in a recent CNN poll say they do not accept that Biden was fairly elected. This is still the case even though Trump has been cut off from social media platforms and seen his mentions decline by as much as 90% since Biden's inauguration, according to one widely circulated recent study. When asked if he accepted the legitimacy of Biden's win, McCarthy blithely told the reporters, "I think that is all over with." But, of course, it was not. It is not. With his bland California smile and fluency in generic Republican cliches, McCarthy does not come across as a conspirator against American democracy. A few months ago, when Cheney's leadership post was first challenged because of her vote to impeach Trump for inciting the mob that stormed the Capitol, McCarthy had defended Cheney. He insisted that the Republican Party still remained a big tent for those with differing beliefs. No more. The party may be a circus, yes, but instead of a big tent, it has a carnival barker with a bullhorn that he will not give up now or ever. This should have been a great week for America. And even, one might dare to say, for its often beleaguered government there in Washington. After billions of dollars in federal investment in successful vaccines during the Trump misadministration and an impressive months-long campaign to distribute them by the new Biden administration, there was finally a sharp drop in COVID-19 cases and deaths in these United States. In some states, as many as 70% of adults are now vaccinated. Vaccinations for 12 to 15-year-olds started on Thursday of last week. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention announced on Thursday that masks are no longer necessary for fully vaccinated people in most settings, indoors or out. The pandemic, it at least seems fair to hope, is finally almost over. But what kind of country will we reemerge, unmasked, into? With Biden in the White House, many people have relished the chance to unplug from Donald Trump and politics altogether in recent months, secure in the knowledge that our new president will not tweet us into nuclear war. Remember, fire and fury! Our late nights and early mornings and weekends are no longer shadowed by the ever-present uncertainty that was the Trump-era news cycle. For those of us who are still paying attention, however, there is a new worry, and it has to do with what Kevin McCarthy and House Republicans did the week before last. Trump, defeated and disgraced by the events of January 6th, might have disappeared as previous presidents who lost re-election did. But his party's continued embrace means that Trump will not fade slowly into the Mar-a-Lago sunset. Cheney told the Today Show on Thursday of last week that he's going to unravel the democracy to come back into power. It is not over. Not at all. McConnell, who has his eyes on overturning Biden's minuscule Senate majority in the midterm elections next year, had himself a busy week before last, while the death rates went down. He just got embroiled in a heated exchange with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer of New York, another of the top leaders who met with Biden on Wednesday of the week before the one we're in, along with his fellow Democrat, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi of my own Golden, California. The flashpoint being one of the most crucial bills currently in Congress, a sweeping effort to introduce national standards to expand access to voting across the country. The measure, known as the For the People Act, would introduce automatic voter registration, expand early and mail-in voting, prevent the purging of voter rolls, and renew key positions of the Voting Rights Act that outlaws discrimination against minorities. This For the People Act, which has already passed the Democratic-led House, is seen by Democrats as a crucial counter to a blizzard of bills passed by Republicans in multiple states that clearly target all voters of color, who overwhelmingly vote for Democrats, making it harder for them to cast their ballots. In general terms, Democrats want to make it easier to vote, and Republicans want to make it harder for you. The party that prevails in this fight will have a significant advantage in the presidential election in 2024. While many Republicans have spent recent months enforcing Trump's lies about election fraud, McConnell, with his customary political dexterity, presents Democrats as the true threat to democracy. On the Senate floor on Tuesday morning of Yester Septimania, McConnell said, "There is nothing bipartisan about this. This is cooked up at the Democratic National Committee and designed to advantage one side to the disadvantage of the other." A more credible Republican argument is that the Democratic plan would impose a federal grip on states that are supposed to run elections. But Schumer accused Republicans of adopting racist policies to stop Black Americans from voting, and compared them to strongmen who crushed pluralism and freedoms in Hungary and Turkey, himself so saying that, in a democracy, when you lose an election, you try to persuade more voters to vote for you. You don't try to ban the other side from voting. That's what Orban does. That's what Erdogan does. That's what dictators do. Well, I can tell it to you straight. You cannot have bipartisanship if one side wants you to fail. On the 5th of May, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell told reporters, "100% of my focus is on stopping this new administration. 100% of my focus is on standing up to this administration." He went on to say there was total unity among Senate Republicans, from Ted Cruz to Susan Collins, in opposition to what the new Biden administration is trying to do to this country. In other words, not a single Republican will help current efforts to end the pandemic, shore up our economy, and make a historic investment in our country's future. Bipartisanship cannot work if one side refuses to cooperate and insists on being 100% opposed to what you do. Senate Democrats, we must go it alone. Meanwhile, the American people want results. We need a bold, big, and green infrastructure plan. We need healthcare reform. We need voting rights legislation to save our democracy. We need gun safety legislation. LGBTQIA+ equality. Quilts badge, the acronym I prefer. We most certainly need a minimum wage increase, and oh, so much more. Senate Democrats cannot allow a determined minority who wants President Biden to fail to stop anything from getting done. We must enact real change, even if it means going alone. Which brings us to the new era of Sino-American competition. Is competition with the Communist Chinese Empire to be the new pork barrel? A bill that aims to counter the fear that Communist China is overtaking the United States technologically passed the U.S. Senate by 86-11 on Monday, heralding the start of a new era of strategic competition, and businesses and special interest groups getting in on the game. The Endless Frontier Act, which has backing from both parties and the White House, would allocate $120 billion to funding new technologies, focusing on artificial intelligence, superconductors, and robotics. It would also support new hubs to geographically diversify the American technology industry, which is heavily concentrated in Silicon Valley. American competition with Communist China is one of just a handful of areas left open for bipartisan cooperation in Washington. The determination to counter Beijing's influence, already present in 2019, has been sharpened by the coronavirus pandemic. The Endless Frontier Act is one of several related to China and co-sponsored by Republicans and Democrats, including Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. Lawmakers have stuffed many other measures, from endangered seafood bans to NASA funding, into the Endless Frontier Act in a preview of things to come. Competition with Red China will be the foreign policy priority for this and future administrations, and special interest groups see attaching their causes to the so-called new Cold War as a way into United States governmental support. This, in a way, mirrors the Chinese political economy itself, where companies leap on slogans such as Belt and Road to win governmental favor. That change is already happening in my local Silicon Valley, where big technologies firms have argued that the U.S. government should overlook their privacy violations and deepen cooperation if the United States is to remain competitive. At the same time, those firms are still trying to reach the Chinese market. Concerns about China are a mainstay of the private space sector, where Beijing's achievements, such as the landing of a vehicle on Mars earlier this week, point to the need for hefty American investment. This competitive mood could be most explosive if, as in the last Cold War, it bleeds into ongoing culture wars in these United States. In the 1950s, anti-Soviet sentiment was used both to justify American racism by painting critics as communists, and to oppose it by pointing out that the United States could never call for fair elections abroad while suppressing them at home. The American right wing already often abuses a largely imagined version of Red China as a boogeyman, but pundits of all stripes love to mobilize Sino-American competition for their pet causes. So expect a lot more rhetoric suggesting that since communist China is supposedly doing X, the United States must also do X to compete, or it must instead do Y in order not to be like the Chinese Communist Party. You see, America is uniquely partisan, and division is growing. Anyone who has watched American politics in recent years knows that a widening gap between left and right, Democrat and Republican, has defined our era. Hardly a week passes without fresh evidence. Americans and some Europeans have often talked of similar divisions in Western Europe's major democracies, divisive issues like Brexit in the United Kingdom, and the rights of religious minorities in France drive comparisons to American polarization. But the United States differs notably from those other countries. Our ideological gaps are much wider on big cultural issues, as proven by a major new study conducted by the Pew Research Center. Pew began to study the comparison during Britain's divisive debate over leaving the European Union and the campaign leading up to Donald Trump's election as president. The Pew organization's Laura Silver, one of the lead authoresses, has since attested that researchers really wanted to see what the concepts of nationalism and cosmopolitanism mean in the postmodern era. What they found provides insights into America's divides and how those differ from other wealthy democracies. The numbers, based on surveys of more than 4,000 adults in the United States, the French Republic, Die Neuverni Deutschland, or the New United Germany, and the United Kingdom, provide us important context for understanding the Republican Party's continuing de-evolution away from the country's business establishment and toward becoming a more populist party of the right. It's all about questions of national identity, so similar to those between Israelis and Palestinians. On several big issues, the center of gravity among reactionaries in the U.S. stands further to the right than it does among their ideological counterparts in Europe, as all of Pew's numbers prove. On the other end of the spectrum, liberals in the U.S. have moved further to the left in the past 4 years. A large share of American conservatives support restrictionist views of national identity, such as believing that truly belonging requires being native-born and being a Christian. A large number also believe that discrimination against minority groups is an exaggerated problem. Since 2016, across all 4 countries surveyed, the public has shifted toward less restrictive stands on issues of national identity. In Europe, that shift took place across the ideological spectrum. But in America, it did not. American liberals moved left, in some cases further left than their European counterparts. American reactionaries, however, started off further to the right than Europeans and simply did not move. Per Silver herself, generally we saw gaps closing in Europe. The gap didn't close comparably in the US. In 2016, for example, majorities in both the US and the United Kingdom, and about half of those surveyed in France, said that to be truly a member of their societies, it was at least somewhat important to be native-born. About a third of Germans held the same view. Now the shareholding that view has dropped a lot in all four countries, to about 1 in 3 in the US, UK, and France, and 1 in 4 in Germany. Each of the national surveys has a margin of error of about 4 percentage points. In the 3 European countries, the drop did not vary much by ideology. In America, liberals shifted much more than reactionaries, so the American divide widened. Pew also asked if being Christian was an important part of being truly American, or British, French, or German. The share saying yes declined in all 4 countries. So has the share saying that to truly belong, a person must observe the country's customs and traditions. As with the question about native birth, however, in the United States, the overall decline has been accompanied by a widening ideological gap. On the question of following national customs, the share of self-identified liberals and moderates calling it an important part of if being truly American declined about 20 points. The share of conservatives did not budge. Responses on a 4th topic, language, underscored the unique nature of the American divide. In 3 European countries, close to 9 in 10 people across the board say being able to speak the dominant language is at least somewhat important to belonging. That's also true of about 9 in 10 American conservatives. But among American liberals, that view has declined sharply over the past 4 years. Just over half now say that speaking English is at least somewhat important for belonging in these United States. On that question, it's American liberals who stand out as different from their European counterparts. On others, American reactionaries stand out. About a third of American reactionaries, for example, say that being native-born is an important part of belonging. In the 3 European countries, no more than 1 in 4 say that. Asked, which is the bigger problem? People not recognizing discrimination when it does exist, or people seeing discrimination where it does not exist? Majorities in Britain, United Germany, and the United States said failure to recognize discrimination is the bigger problem. In France, the public closely splits on that issue. In all 4 countries, a gap separates left and right on that question, with conservatives more likely to say the bigger problem is claiming discrimination where it doesn't exist. In these United States, however, the ideological gap is twice as large as in the United Kingdom or France, and 4 times larger than in United Germany. Similarly, the ideological split in these United States is about twice as large as in any of the 3 European countries when people are asked if their country would be better off if it sticks to its traditions and way of life versus being open to changes regarding its traditions and way of life. Religion is one of the factors that contributes to the larger ideological gap in the United States, America remains more religious than most European societies, and white Christians, in particular, have become the mainstay for Republicans, with Silver noting that Christians stand out on many issues from non-Christians. They are more likely to say that there is a great deal of discrimination against Christians in their society, and to say that being Christian is essential to truly being part of their country's citizenry than non-Christians. They are also more likely to say other key factors, including speaking the language and being born in country, are essential components of national belonging. Not only are Christians a larger share of the population in these United States, American Christians are more likely than European ones to identify as being on the right politically, with Silver proving that 52% of American Christians did so, compared with 48% in France, 36% in the United Kingdom, and 27% in United Germany. The survey found that the positions taken by a large share of American conservatives put them in line with European supporters of right-wing populist parties such as the National Front in France and the Nationalist Alternative for Germany, both neo-Nazi fronts. That, in turn, helps explain the continuing strength of the populist faction of the Russo collaborationist Red Republican insurgency. Trump himself benefited from the rise of populism in his party, but as this Pew survey helps make clear, he did not invent it, and it's not likely to dissipate whenever he departs from the political scene. In fact, reactionary anger at big tech has pushed the Russo collaborationist Red Republican insurgency into Bernie Sanders' communist corner. During most of Donald Trump's time in the White House, Silicon Valley could regard the legal threats Republicans hurled its way as a sideshow. Unfocused, unserious, untenable. But a campaign launched in a cauldron of conservative grievance over censorship allegations, complaints of woke corporate values, and the power wielded by a few Bay Area billionaires has, in former President Trump's absence, morphed into something far more wearisome to concern big business. The Russo collaborationist Red Republican cult push to break up, or at least punish big tech, is now an unexpectedly disciplined movement that is causing corporate concern far beyond the boardrooms of Silicon Valley, as the cultic party's identity is increasingly focused around reining in the power of large companies. The shift is shuffling alliances inside the Red Party and out. It's also moving many Republican lawmakers to abandon a decades-long conservative free market orthodoxy to join communist progressives in demanding the federal government vastly expand its antitrust operations. The decision by Facebook's oversight board on Wednesday of the week before last to extend its ban of Donald Trump from the platform has further propelled the movement. To many in the Russo collaborationist Republican cult, big business has become a more attractive target than big government. Matt Stoller, Director of Research for the nonpartisan American Economic Liberties Project, which advocates the dilution of all corporate power, observed, "They had been listening for years to the economists who tell them firms should be able to do anything they want. All of a sudden they are confronting an economy and political order where that has become very difficult for them." Some of the most aggressive and potentially effective action on the antitrust front, so Stoller said, is now being pursued by Republicans. He noted that in federal court, it is Republican attorneys general who have been most forceful in their antitrust cases against Google and Facebook, alleging the companies are abusing illegal, monopolistic tactics to dominate the marketplace and mislead users. The landmark antitrust action by Google, or against Google, filed by the Justice Department, was launched in the final weeks of the Trump administration. The ideological lines are blurring so fast, it is hard to keep track of who in the Russell collaborationist red Republican cult falls where, and whether the rhetoric is coming from Senator Ted Cruz or Senator Bernie Sanders. The Texas Republican Cancun Cruz, once a longtime business ally, recently tweeted that any massive accumulation of power is bad, himself now branding big corporations, big tech, and big Hollywood as just as dangerous as big government. The antitrust crusaders on the left are skeptical. Both Sanders, the independent from Vermont, and Massachusetts Senatoress Elizabeth Warren, who launched the hashtag Break Up Big Tech movement before it was in vogue with reactionaries, says Republicans remain very much beholden to big business. They point to the big corporate tax breaks championed by the Russell collaborationist red cult, and it's blocking a $15 United States dollar minimum wage. Warren suggested the right is not experiencing a titanic shift so much as a titanic tantrum after the companies made richer by the tax cuts dared speak out against Russell collaborationist red Republican voter suppression efforts, herself so telling the Daily Beast that Republicans have finally been called out, and following up by observing Republicans had assumed that so long as they cut taxes for corporate America, everything will be sunshine and roses. They're wrong. For some in the Russell collaborationist red Republican cult, the push begins and ends with sloganeering with lawmakers more focused on scoring points in the culture wars than in restructuring grand capitalism. But the shouting over cable news and social media is increasingly accompanied by determined bipartisan policy work that could ultimately realign government's role in regulating companies. To quotist the Representative Ro Khanna, a Democrat from Fremont, the Silicon Valley progressive who co-founded the Congressional Antitrust Caucus, there is momentum for thoughtful reforms, but people need to understand antitrust is not a cure-all. We should not give people false hope that it will create more empowerment and equity. In Congress, Republican lawmakers are joining Democrats in diving into the weeds of obscure corporate law as they search out ways to undercut the power of large firms. It was clear the movement has evolved beyond just a political vendetta against Silicon Valley during a recent congressional grilling of pharmaceutical companies, when the antitrust concerns raised by Republicans were hard to distinguish from those raised by Democrats on the panel. They all started to sound alike, like, the end of the novel written by George Orwell, Animal Farm, when you could not tell pig from man. In the Arizona and North Dakota state houses, Apple and Google were alarmed by the momentum of Russell collaborationist red Republican champion measures that challenged their market dominance over mobile app distribution. Red Republicans on the U.S. House Judiciary Committee's antitrust panel hedged on some of the specific plans Democrats laid out for a crackdown on Silicon Valley in a 450-page report released in October, but their own minority report, overseen by Colorado Republican Representative Ken Buck, gave tech firms plenty to be alarmed about in and of itself. Representative Kelly Armstrong of North Dakota, a Republican who served with Buck on the antitrust panel, was once quoted as saying, "Guys like me and Ken Buck walked into this thinking the free market could solve this stuff, and there really isn't a role for Congress here." Well, now Armstrong thinks differently. The reactionary said he found himself in hearings about Silicon Valley pursuing the same line of questioning as Representative Pramila Jayapal, the Democrat from Washington, who chairs the Congressional Progressive Caucus, with Armstrong asserting, "I don't think anybody will be confusing her ideology and mine of being the same. But when it comes to this stuff, we were piggybacking off each other's questions." Yay. Yay, the conservative fervor for regulation extends all the way to the Supreme Court, where Justice Clarence Thomas opined from the bench in April that tech platforms have become so powerful the federal government should consider regulating them as public utilities. The momentum is propelled not just by Trump boosters, but also a large contingent of anti-Trumpers, leaving free market think tanks and advocacy organizations caught off guard and trying to mobilize a counteroffensive. L.I. Lehrer, president of R Street Institute, a free market think tank, has affirmed that, even a few months ago, I would have said a bipartisan bill that targets the structure and scale of individual firms was very unlikely. Today, I would say that there is a decent chance it could happen. I don't believe there is a free market majority in the Republican Party anymore. The enthusiasm among a growing set of Russo collaborationist red Republican lawmakers for abusing the power of government to weaken the influence of our nation's biggest companies is hardly unprecedented in the party of trustbuster President Theodore Roosevelt. The Republican Roosevelt, you might recall. Yet, for decades, Republicans have been closely aligned with big business and have looked askance at robust antitrust enforcement, except in the most extreme circumstances, such as when the Reagan administration broke up telephone monopolies. The path Republicans are taking back to a party that embraces this kind of regulation is not always coherent, and it is complicated by presidential hopefuls positioning themselves as heirs to Trump's erratic brand of populism. The declaration by longtime corporate ally Cancun Cruz that he is disavowing corporate PAC or Political Action Committee money invited charges of opportunism. There has been eye-rolling at Senator Josh Hawley, the Republican from Missouri, hawking his new book about the tyranny of big tech on Amazon. The threats to strip antitrust exemptions from Major League Baseball were not driven so much by concerns that baseball is too big, but to punish the organization for moving its all-star game out of Georgia in protest of the state's new voting restrictions against all coloreds. The Conservative Heritage Foundation, meanwhile, in December urged conservatives to fight far-left efforts to make it easier for the federal government to use antitrust law to reshape and control the technology sector and other sectors of the economy. But Heritage President Casey James put Google on notice that it may not be a reliable ally. Her scathing letter refusing to accept the company's $225,000 donation pointed to the growing momentum in Washington to rein in technology companies through antitrust and other measures, with a sentence from her reading, "Heritage is in the midst of reviewing these proposals, and the last thing we need is for anyone to think our conclusions have in any way been influenced by a relatively small donation from Google." Well, unlike on the left, where complaints about big business are more rooted in economic inequality and the treatment of workers, the antitrust conversation in the Russo collaborationist red cult more often turns to social issues. The party is facing companies increasingly vocal on positions at odds with Russo collaborationist red cult insurgent doctrine. The deplatforming of cult messiah Trump, the big business boycotts of Russo collaborationist red Republican insurgent controlled states restricting the right to vote and the rights of transgender residents, and the corporate embrace of the Paris Agreement on climate change that so many Republican cultists detest have pushed reactionaries to rethink their relationship with these companies. Mike Madrid, a Republican strategist in my own Golden, California, has gone so far as to admit that the corporate business community is no longer a trusted validator to the average grand old party voter. They don't see it much differently than they see big government. Well, Republicans have been here before. Theodore Roosevelt's legacy was built on his crusading against robber barons and monopolies, and it was during the Nixon and Ford administrations that the federal government was most active in antitrust enforcement. Daniel Crane, a professor at University of Michigan Law School, confirms that the question now is how much of that power lawmakers will dilute, himself concluding that we're at an inflection moment. There are a range of possibilities of where this goes. It's not just people on the left that are afraid of concentrated power. There's a long-standing conservative tradition that is very suspicious of it. There is concern about what happens to free market capitalism if we allow capital to get out of control and get too big. Now, as a fascist, I can tell you that in this case, I'm also a corporatist. Now, as I've said before, the difference between fascism and capitalism is that in capitalism, the corporations control the government through lobbying, whereas in fascism, the state controls the corporations. But we have to ask now, at this moment in history, have corporations been absorbed by the woke mob, as high-profile Republicans have taken to claiming? Why are corporations for democracy, against racism, and invested in fighting climate change? Are Nike, Delta, and Major League Baseball the new social justice warriors? Please. Corporations aren't woke. They just know their customers. They're trying to please people and thereby turn profits. Watch and learn, Republicans. Whether you're conservative or liberal, whether you condemn or cheer things like Nike's Colin Kaepernick ads or the corporate pushback against Georgia's new voting law, don't be tricked into thinking that America's corporate giants are becoming something fundamentally different from what they've always been. But what you can see in them as, in addition to profit pursuers, are bellwethers, highly useful signalers of where the culture is headed and how reality-based organizations are positioning themselves for success. While you can never count on corporations to be your political best friend, or enemy, for that matter, you can certainly pick up a thing or two observing their behavior. Profit motive knows no ideology. For those accustomed to strong alignment between big business and the Russo collaborationist Red Republican insurgency, the world has seemed upside down in the weeks since passage of Georgia's controversial voting measures. Republican standard-bearers have attacked companies, including Atlanta-based Delta Airlines and Coca-Cola, for criticizing the legislation. But even before, mega companies, including Amazon and Facebook, have been under fire, sometimes for good reason, from Russo collaborationist Red Republican fury-mongers. Senator Marco Rubio, the Republican from Florida, Rubio, has threatened to retaliate against companies for their aggressive positions on woke cultural issues that tear at our national fabric. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp ridiculed Major League Baseball's knee-jerk reaction, or their decision to move this summer's All-Star game out of Atlanta, charging that cancel culture and woke political activists are coming for every aspect of your life. And the Senate Republican cult leader Mitch McConnell has warned corporate CEOs to stay out of politics, later clarifying that he would tolerate the form of political participation that consists of donating large sums of money to him and his party. Democrats might feel like jumping to the unqualified defense of corporate entities that are suddenly in the rival party's firing line. If they do, they'll quickly find themselves walking it back a la McConnell because Facebook, Amazon, really? Companies might anger Republicans today, but they will inevitably do something to infuriate Democrats tomorrow. As Elizabeth Brunig correctly notes, capital is unfaithful. It can, and does, play all sides. The profit motive that compels companies to commit dastardly deeds also compels them, at other times, to do things that might strike you as righteous. When the latter, it's not because they are essentially virtuous, because they're most certainly not, but because pursuit of profit has, for the moment at least, driven them to the side of the angels. And their calculations are not always right. But public-facing companies have powerful incentive to figure out where their current or desired markets are going and how they can go there too. When their bottom lines are at stake, businesses cannot afford to be ruled by the fact-free ideologies and conspiracy theories that hold such sway today over the red cult. Take the insurance industry and the climate crisis. For years, while oil companies and their political defenders did everything they could to deny, downplay, and distract, those running the insurance companies had no choice but to pay attention to what was really happening. As in more storms, more floods, more property damage, more payouts, with worse ever yet to come. Now, Swiss Re, one of the world's largest insurance companies, has issued a report warning that the effects of climate change, wildfires, reduced crop yields, rising sea levels, and so on, threaten to hammer the global economy in the coming years and decades. When it comes to the reality and effects of the climate crisis, who is more motivated to understand accurately and speak truthfully? A corporation that actually pays the bills of a deteriorating climate? Or political actors who don't like the implications of climate change and thus pretend it isn't real? That's what brings us back to what's good for business. Then there's Nike. Despite their pro-business predilections, many Republicans were aghast at Nike's embrace of Kaepernick at the exact time he was antagonizing the NFL, the National Football League, at great cost to his football career, with his social justice activism. You may recall the startling ad that Nike rolled out in 2018, a close-up of the ostracized quarterback's face behind text reading, "Believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything." As with its other athlete-oriented campaigns, Nike was making a hero of Kaepernick and implying that you could share in the glory by buying the brand. What stood out was the nature of the athlete's heroic deeds, which this time were taking place not on the field or court, but in the arena of activism. Why would Nike do this? Because the company had reason to believe it would be good for business. Because it knew the people in its market were attracted to diversity and inclusion and appalled by fatal shootings of black people by police. To flip the infamous Michael Jordan line of a bygone era, Nike knew that Democrats buy sneakers too. To quote his Thomas DiNapoli, New York State Comptroller and trustee for its public pension fund, companies are reading the writing on the wall. What they see is driving many to support anti-racism, address the climate crisis, and stand up for democracy. Not because they're bleeding hearts, but because they want to please customers, operate in positive business environments, and make us more money. They're not woke, just open-eyed and alert to keeping up with the culture. I myself can think of one political party that ought to take a cue. Now that brings us, of course, to why Taiwan is so important to you. By the way, Nathan Brooks says, "Good morning, Team DDD." And WTF, or What the Fuck, says, "Good evening, Douglas and all. Just tuning in after a long day at work. Swinging it like two dogs at the moment. Can't believe the orange stain is still kicking. After all, he is a heart attack waiting to happen." Speaking of Trump, of course. WTF says, "Looking forward to the remainder of this transmission. Love, love, Mr. DDD. Love you too, Mr. What the Fuck, Mr. WTF." And of course, catching up with the number of those we have watching in terms of live stream. You never, of course, get what you have with the first phase of transmission, so hopefully this will catch up in those who listen to it on review. Right now, we've got everyone probably still stuck on the first transmission, and hopefully they'll catch up with this later. Certainly, it's very important that all of you upvote it, share it, bring it to other people's attention, and that way we can make certain that people are exposed to really the message that has got to go out before I let others take over the show. The global shortage of semiconductors has emerged as a full-blown crisis from the start of the year. Matter of fact, I might actually save this for transmission on the next show because it's a subject that is important to me, as is the Australia subject. There's no point in expanding it when we don't necessarily have a large group of listeners, and we can say that the arc of narrative that I concluded with to this point about the Republicans, they should learn from their corporations that they want supported. That took us through 3 hours, and oftentimes that would be what I had left at the time. I think I had a little bit more than that left at the time that we were transmitting before we were cut off, but let's take a look at how long the last transmission was. It was 7.5 hours, so we had about, let me see, oh God, let me do this with the calculator, because of course, that mind I used to have, no longer exists because I drugged it all away. Don't do that, kids. Don't do that to yourself. Okay, 7.5 equals, 4.5 hours. So I guess I could carry on more. That would carry us through, let me see, compared to what we did now, which is about 3.25 hours. It would that would leave us with about 15 minutes and an hour and 15 minutes left. And so in terms of the time, that would bring us to 7 minutes, about 7:15 when I should quit. So there we go with that. And so I guess I could cover some issues now. The question would be exactly where to take this. I guess the one thing I could do is we can cover, of course, what was brought up by our friend Jameson Reese concerning the potential for another stimulus check, and just how important that is. And of course, that leads us into the need for a universal basic income. After all, I am a national socialist, and there has to be a socialism in which to buffer ourselves. Now, with everything I've said about companies, rather than segue over to the Pacific and Taiwan and Australia, which will become more relevant more than likely the next time we're speaking on Sunday, we can stay domestic for the moment, and we can look at how our president, our legally elected president, Joseph Biden, has dethroned the concept of the welfare queen. You see, President Joseph Biden has been compared to Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Lyndon Baines Johnson, and has even been called the anti-Reagan. But there's another legendary political character that people should cite to explain why Biden's governing approach during his first 100 days in office is such a radical break from the past in this new postmodern era where Republicans are attacking corporate capitalism. And as they say, you know, that circle of politics where people go far enough to the right, and then it becomes a circle. The left end of the spectrum meets right up with them, and they all wind up exactly alike. Authoritarian to the bone. Totalitarians. That is where the Republicans and the out-and-out communists of the Bernie Sanders stripe have found themselves in a corner. But the real enemy that so many years haunted America was that Reagan-inspired specter of a black woman of indeterminate age who has 12 Social Security cards, mooches on benefits from 4 fake dead husbands, and collects welfare payments under 80 bogus names while collecting food stamps. She, of course, was Reagan's equivalent of the NBA, or Michael Aquino's nigger bitch avatar that he sicked loose upon professionals who he wanted to drive to the point where they would unleash racist vitriol that would destroy their careers. Ronald Reagan unleashed upon the white American psyche the infamous welfare queen. That's how Ronald Reagan himself described this ebony specter when he introduced the fallacious phantom during a presidential campaign rally nearly half 100 years ago. Reporters investigating Reagan's 1976 welfare queen story concluded that it wasn't quite true. And though never mentioning a name or race, Reagan had exaggerated the abuses of an actual black woman in Chicago. It didn't matter, however, if the story was more fiction than fact. The phantom welfare queen embodied the Red Russell collaborationist Republican cult's belief that sending government aid to the poor would backfire because freeloaders, hint, them niggas, you know, the black people, will invariably splurge that money on steak and lobster. The welfare queen became the political equivalent of a horror movie villainess. Democratic leaders did not have a counter-story that could stop it. It spread the myth that most black and poor people were lazy cheaters looking for a handout instead of a hand up. The story was so influential that even Democratic presidents became as leery of pushing big government solutions to help low-income people of color. But Joe Biden is now boldly going where no contemporary Democratic president has ever gone before. And he's destroying one of the Russo collaborationist Red Republican cult's most effective political attacks in the process. The heart of Joe Biden's Build Back Better agenda is 3 massive plans that would use huge sums of government money to help working families, including people of color. The American Rescue Plan, which was signed into law in March, includes direct cash payments to struggling families. 2 other plans would rebuild our country's infrastructure and expand tax credits to help working families and make its education more affordable. What's fascinating is how Republicans have responded. It's not what they've said, that Biden is a radical and a socialist, and his proposals are a sloppy liberal wish list. It's what they haven't said that's so revealing. They haven't successfully deployed any welfare queen-like stories about people of color mooching off pandemic aid to turn a critical mass of white voters against Biden's plans. If there have been such attacks, they haven't gained any traction. In a recent interview describing 3 right-wing lines of attack against the president, James Carville told the Daily Beast that the Republicans don't have a coherent pushback. It's all CBS, with emphasis on the BS. CBS for cancel culture, B for the border, and S for senility. With the border and senility comprising the bullshit, the cancel culture has been the only thing that's been the hardest hitting because of their repetitive abuse of a phantom concept. You know, it's hard to brand Uncle Joe a radical. Few people would have even predicted Biden to be the leader who deposed the myth of the welfare queen. He once helped her retain her place on the throne. You see, Biden once described our nation's ill-fated attempts to integrate public schools in the 1970s as forced busing. Yeah, he's that fucking old. I was going to school and growing up while this guy was in power. Back then, Biden cited his ability to get things done with white supremacist senators despite fundamental political disagreements. He even helped spread the welfare queen myth. In 1988, when he was an American senator, Biden wrote a column for a Delaware newspaper in which he argued that the welfare system had collapsed. He wrote, "We are all too familiar with the stories of welfare mothers driving luxury cars and leading lifestyles that mirror the rich and famous. Whether they are exaggerated or not, these stories underlie a broad social concern that the welfare system has broken down." More recently, Biden's reputation as a centrist with a problematic history with black voters dogged him during the 2020 Democratic primaries. Then-rival Kamala Harris memorably confronted Biden during one debate over his opposition to busing. A majority of registered voters still think he is more moderate than Obama, though his policies, so far, have actually been more progressive. CNN's Stephen Collinson recently wrote that as an elderly white man, Biden is a difficult target for Trump-loving conservatives who like to portray racially diverse Democrats as a threat to what they see as Anglo-Saxon cultural traditions. What was once seen as Biden's vulnerability as a Democratic candidate, his mixed record on race, has become a presidential asset. It's easier for him to propose plans that help people of color without sparking a white backlash. Consider the language he uses to describe his Build Back Better agenda. In the second paragraph of its introductory statement on the White House website, he talks of how Black and Latino Americans, Native Americans, immigrants, and women have never been welcome as full participants in the economy. Biden also openly describes his American Jobs Plan, which would invest in rebuilding roads and airports as a plan to raise the wages of home health aides and caregivers, professions where the majority of workers are women of color. This is remarkable. A Democratic president is talking boldly and unapologetically about using government aid to not just help millions of working people, but also people of color. It's a truly radical departure from past years, when Republican leaders kept Democrats on the defensive by deploying varying versions of the same welfare queen story that blended racism with contempt for the poor. One Republican cult leader called Barack Obama a food stamp president. Another warned of a tailspin of culture in inner-city neighborhoods and complained that able-bodied people were turning the safety net into a hammock. Even past Democratic presidents have been influenced by this racist rhetoric. President William Jefferson Clinton vowed to end welfare as we've come to know it when he led the passage of a welfare reform law in 1996. And Obama proposed cutting Social Security to ensure its long-term viability. Uncle Joe, however, seems immune so far to such attacks. The pandemic has given Biden another powerful political story. Frederick W. Mayer, a political scientist, once said that politics often revolves around a contest of stories. Himself so writing, "Tell a story! Facts are great, analysis is important, but if the goal is political mobilization, a shared story is essential. And remember, you cannot beat a story without another story." Democrats could never beat the welfare queen story because that story was loaded with racist stereotypes about black people that have been ingrained in American culture for centuries. When Jared Kushner, former President Trump's White House, said, "Trump can't wait for them blacks to be successful more than they want to be successful," employing a well-worn stereotype that blacks are lazy. White slaveholders derided blacks as shiftless. Early Hollywood once offered white audiences popular black characters such as Sleepin' Eat and Steppin' Fetchit, dubbed the laziest man in the world. Perhaps no one should have been surprised when a 2017 University of Chicago survey found that 55% of white Republicans agreed with the statement that blacks don't have the motivation or willpower to pull themselves up out of poverty. In the same poll, 26% of white Democrats said the same. Eduardo Porter, author of a work entitled American Poison, subtitled how racial hostility destroyed our promise, has articulated that the pandemic has offered Joe Biden a counter to that stereotype. The black and brown essential workers who risk their lives under grueling conditions throughout this pandemic to help others. In his book, Porter proves that the United States has the most meager social safety net in the club of advanced nations, because so many white Americans have been persuaded to oppose government programs that, while helping them, also help what they consider to be undeserving black and brown people. To quote his T, "The welfare queen story was immensely powerful, but you try to find stories that push back against these tropes. For instance, most of the frontline workers in all of our cities have been mostly black and brown. They've been exposing themselves to the virus while delivering food and Grubhub to you while you're working at home. That's a story that has a lot of potential to change minds." Biden has consistently lifted up these workers, who have helped keep the American economy going at great risk to their own safety, their very lives. Just days after winning the presidency yesteryear, Joe Biden said to a group of essential workers that, "It's not enough to praise you. We have to protect you. We have to pay you." Yes, the poor can be trusted with money. The welfare queen also is no longer a potent symbol because Biden has taken advantage of a shift in thinking about how to help the poor. There be a growing consensus in academic circles that one of the best ways to help the poor is to give them money with no strings attached. Much of the traditional government aid to the poor is built on the assumption that poor people are morally irresponsible. This, of course, sources back to the old puritanical days of the Bible-thumping white Anglo-Saxon Protestant saying, "Get off your ass and work except on Sundays, when you have to kneel before God before you go back to work." Now, recipients of aid, for those of you who don't know, oftentimes must submit to drug tests, interviews, and proof of employment, for God's sake, which would beg the question of why they need aid. Restrictions that imply poor people cannot even be trusted to make their own decisions. The city of Stockton, in my own Golden, California, recently launched a program that shattered all of those assumptions. That city, so geographically close to myself and so near and dear to my heart, sent $1,000 United States monthly payments to 125 randomly selected people who were living in neighborhoods with average incomes lower than the city median of 46,000 United States dollars a year, and told them they could spend the money as they saw fit. No strings attached. Researchers proved that the people who received the free money were able to land full-time jobs at more than twice the rate of people in another group that did not receive cash. The extra money also gave recipients more stability to learn new job skills, start businesses, and improve their mental outlook. Other similar experiments around the world have reached identical conclusions. Annie Lowry, a writer at The Atlantic magazine, summed up the key finding of the Stockton experiment when she said, "The best way to get people out of poverty is just get them out of poverty. The best way to offer families more resources is simply to offer them more resources." Biden's economic plans reflect this reality. His American Rescue Plan sent direct payments of $1,400 per person to many American households. Former President Donald Trump sent similar payments during the pandemic to many Americans. in his attempt to buy their loyalty while killing them. Biden's $1.9 trillion United States dollar plan, signed into law in March, offers some parents the option of receiving a $300 monthly payment from the IRS from July through December as part of the enhanced child tax credit. The sheer scale of Biden's multi-trillion-dollar effort to end the pandemic and make life better for millions of struggling Americans has inspired some commentators to say that Biden has closed the door on the Reagan era. David Brooks of the New York Times wrote, "This moment is like 1981, the dawn of the Reagan Revolution, except in reverse. It's not just that government is heading in a new direction. It's the whole paradigm of the role of government in American life is shifting. Biden is not causing these tectonic plates to shift, but he is riding them." The welfare queen myth was a racist fable that reinforced some of the ugliest stereotypes about black and poor people. Countless Americans suffered because they couldn't get the help they needed. Perhaps some of Biden's plans will never become its law in a closely divided Senate. Maybe the welfare queen story will mutate and come roaring back in another racist, viral narrative. But commentators like Brooks should add another paradigm shift to Biden's list of accomplishments. Biden has done what neither Clinton nor Obama could ever do. He's dethroned the phantom welfare queen. Well, let me provide another solicitation for myself. God knows I need it. And we'll take off from the live stream. Excellent though its connection is. We've gone 3.5 hours. My solicitation should bring it close to 4. And then we'll go back to the microchip crisis, cross the Pacific to Taiwan and Australia. But where we're at here, this side of the ocean that covers the majority of the surface of the earth, we really don't have enough people listening right now to motivate me to continue. Hopefully everyone catches up. And again, hit those upvotes. Make it certain that you keep us running. And in the case of myself, Mein Kampf, my struggle be thine own, contribute to the struggle at paypal.me/Douglas Dietrich, where you need to indicate myself as friends and family in order to prevent that faggot Peter Thiel from coming in and excising your contribution and compromising its coherency. We now be accepting contributions via PayPal Holdings Incorporated at douglasdietrich.com, where you'll find the yellow button. And in all due acknowledgement unto our own personal hero, we asketh of everyone moral and our fiscal support on behalf of our dearest English brother in battle, John Henry McMills Warrington, whom you can friend and follow via his Facebook timeline at facebook.com/John.War. And, of course, subscribe to his YouTube maggot channel at youtube.com/C/Magator, which is spelled MAGGOTAUR, he being the property manager thereof, who also serves as Team Drax, Dietrich's or Dragon's ultimate post-episodic producer, and our final productions archivist at douglasdietrich.com. And finally, of course, well, not finally, but concerning him, don't forget he has another channel, and you need to check that out because that will help us all. Go to odyssey.com/@maggote and spell it ODYSEE.com/@maggot:E, like maggot colony. Go there and enter Douglas Dietrich in the search bar to see if you can find my programs and then try to access them, which may prove impossible for many people because the user interface on Odyssey is completely retarded. But Odyssey has no censorship, and it serves as another backup for that which we publish and produce. And if you're able to access the programs at all, it will boost his credits thereon because they utilize a kind of cryptocurrency which allows him to upload more shows without spending a bean, as he would say. For were it not for he and I, all videographic works of the internationally recognized renegade military historian would have been lost. So if financial aid no be prohibitive per budgetary constraints, electronically relay monetary assistance via PayPal, where you can donate to the Maggot Man, aka John Warrington, by clicking send on your PayPal account page and then entering his email address, john_war@hotmail.com. And you can PayPal him directly at paypal.me/Magator, which be spelled Maggotaur. If anyone deserves any financial support aside myself, it would be John Warrington, because he took it upon himself to download the majority of what I published on YouTube into his own personal hard drives, from where we were able to reconstruct much of my legacy online when I was scrubbed from the internet no less than three times in the past. And each time he acted as the bridge between the Akashic records and the infodata matrix of our material world. And in that sense, he's my creator, enabling my virtual self to interact with yourself now. And you, well, now you too can do your part to help in the fight against total annihilation, whether of myself, my legacy, or all life on the surface of the earth, which be the ultimate objective of the cult of the kings of Edom and their Herodian insurgency. Their insurgency in the name of Herod, the man who would have killed your God if you proclaim yourself a Christian. Spread the word about Douglas Dietrich, that he, the one man who has ever stood openly against this nemesis of the amalgamated cults of chaos, the biological son of Adolphus Jacob Hitler, which you can find out more about at douglasdietrich.com/2019/05/08/ Douglas Dietrich, son of Adolf Hitler, fighting against white supremacist neo-Nazis, and confer while there. A footnote on mine bio, sire, on the homepage of showsdd.com, where you can find out the meaning of the name of my biological father, the name what made the man, and then take it upon yourself to spread the word far and wide to all and sundry that the scion of Adolf Hitler, Douglas Dietrich, be alive and well and resident in the city and county of San Francisco, and, if at all possible, convince others to electronically relay their contributions at paypal.me/Douglas Dietrich. For people are forever asking, Renegadus Humanus Arma ab Maza Erudicio, the renegade human weapon of mass instruction, what they can do to fight the pedopathophilocracy, such being our present Slavo-Western government by patriarchy of pathological pedophiles. You can all help spread awareness by supporting myself. We have a new contribution page on douglasdietrich.com where you can make a donation online using either thy credit or debit card, should you not wish to insinuate myself as friends and family. If you find that so distasteful, yet want to present a contribution that is not compromised, use anything other than PayPal. Any credit or debit card will do. You simply go us to douglasdietrich.com and click the red donate button, where there be no need to worry about a middleman, and your contribution will arrive in its coherent form. And thereafter, click the yellow donate button anyway, because all sponsors will be granted exclusive electronic access to both my videographic and audio recorded archives through to this year from the 2011th year in our Lord, the very year mine own late and sainted matriarch, the Grand Madame Diana Takabayashi Hideko Dietrich Suchinlin was murdered, assassinated, nigh immediately aftermath. Sanjuichi Sensemi, the 3/11 terror attack against the Fukushima Daiichi, our Big One cluster of nuclear power plant facilities on site, the 7,000 isles of the greater Japanese Empire, when 'twas deemed by much Native American cosmological reckoning that the dawning of the sixth world had broken upon us and magics could again be worked conjointly with Mother Earth to redeem the folk upon her. They're not on YouTube anymore, where on the intra-global crisis analyst Douglas Duane Dietrich long agone established his high-profile visibility platform per rationale of personal security by way of public promotion. Only on contribution will thy membership be processed within 48 through 72 hours, between 2 to 3 days, for full access to all mine archives, meaning all those videos that John Warrington saved, aside those on the Maggot Douglas Dietrich channel, and the YouTube channel named Taboo Bros 2, spelled TABOO space BROS space Roman numeral 2, as managed by the mixed martial arts maestro Daniel Arola, whom you can visit at facebook.com/Daniel.Arola.3 of Damage, DAMAG, Daniel Arola Martial Arts Group Incorporated, Cali Combatives. Optionally mail either checks or money orders, never cash, to the personal residential address of the Mr. Douglas Dietrich, which itself be listed on douglasdietrich.com/donate-2, the most important thing being that people regularly donate what they can within their means. Foremost among Axis Daddy D's donors, aside his mistress and manageress, Selina Khan, be our most beloved greater British brother in battle, the Team Drax, Dietrich's Our Dragons, heavyweight lifting, keeper of the spirits, and YouTube Bizarre HD managing mixologist, the managing mixologist of the Bizarre HD channel, which you can subscribe to at youtube.com/user/Bizarre HD, which be spelled BIZAREHD. George Edward Knight, whom you can friend at facebook.com/george.e.knight.7, he being mine own personal hero, who has substantially delivered towards my salvation from the streets, and whose self-produced videos entitled How the United States Won World War I and Why We Are Still Legally at War with the Third Reich both be factually substantiated per mine own expositions and are now joined with his third production, The Thousand-Year Reich in Exile, subtitled The Third Reich's Flugelrad and Hanabu Technology. Indeed, the last Dietrich, son of Dietrich's or son of a dragon's, Anglo-corrupted as Dracula's, expositions via YouTube would not be possible sans generous benefactions from my listeners on a monthly basis. The Amerasian agent of the Peacock Angel, Tavush Maliak, be the only person on the surface of this world with the insider knowledge and experience necessary to lead thy resistance against the Russo-sub-satanic occupation and anti-godly insurgency at bearing no end of emphasis, that Judy, Anglo-corrupted as Jedi, literally Master D, or the Master of Enlightenment myself, is not paid to articulate mine expositions and have never once been remunerated for my services rendered unto thyself and all thy holdest dear, at incomparable sacrifices to myself, most tragically of all mine loved ones, in my most singular and quite unenviable role as the ultimate public informant at personal risk, still at large. Your taxation cannot support myself as I be denied access to the United States Department of Veterans Affairs benefits and our services to dishonorable discharge. So again, go to paypal.me/Douglas Dietrich and enter mine remunerative compensation indicating myself, friends and family, so that no cut be excised. The very survival of the human species be at stake, and I am not exaggerating. Do not wait. Donate now. It be appreciated beyond my ability to express in any language. As well, forget not to subscribe to the Douglas Dietrich YouTube channel at youtube.com/C/Douglas Dietrich and click that notification bell in order to receive notifications that live streams has started. Even if you be subscribed, you will only receive notifications if you select all in notifications. To reemphasize, subscribe to the Douglas Dietrich YouTube channel at youtube.com/C/Douglas Dietrich. Tune in at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, that would be 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, every Wednesday and Sunday, and click that notification bell in order to receive notifications that live streams has started. Finally, above and beyond all else, subscribe and support at douglasdietrich.com. And most importantly of all, donate at paypal.me/Douglas Dietrich, indicating myself, friends, and family, so that a pound of flesh is not excised and your contribution remains coherent. Sponsors will be granted exclusive access to the online archives by awarding themselves the press of the yellow button, the same one you use to access PayPal, which brings you to the homepage of showsdd.com, where you can register with the archives and thereafter avail yourself of all video and MP3 recordings of Douglas Dietrich from 2011 through to the present at your leisure from that point forward. My love be unto thee, who have supported me throughout this morning and throughout all my transmissions. God bless you all in that regard. And join us again on Sunday night, where then, with enough listeners to justify it, we will go into the chip crisis, Taiwan, and the reality of Australia, unbeknownst to most Australians, let alone Americans. For all the people that we have over there, bizarrely enough, as loyal listeners, God bless those that support myself. And with that, of course, we'll cease transmission. Ending live stream. And